Russ?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you go. I can hear you. You sound a little faint. Awesome. So Catherine, Marvin Butler, he's also a board member, correct?
Correct.
Okay, he came in as an attendee, and I just promoted him. I don't see him connected to video or audio yet.
Justin Sutton's not going to be able to be here today, so we're going to be utilizing alternates. I don't know if Rodney or Catherine want to be the one to pick the roster order of how they typically alternate between items.
Yeah, I would defer to Rodney on that. We can discuss that when we start the meeting.
Hey Beth, I still don't have your email.
It should have just come from the meeting. It probably would have come from like WebEx or something. So I don't know if it's a spam.
I don't have any of them. I don't have any of them. Check on my phone.
Isabel at MaddoxLawFirm.com.
Yep.
Okay, let me send again. Good. Thank you. Okay, Catherine, I have a common user that I can't hear who they are. Oh, and they dropped. So how are we doing with you?
Well, just got your tab.
of situation, and then I also cut my camera and do my voice, and I'm just.
The meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the May 11th, 2020 meeting of the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. My name is Rodney Twink and I'm chair of the board. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are conducting this meeting using a remote electronic platform. This is the first remote meeting of the Raleigh Board of Adjustment. I would ask for your patience today as we proceed. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, participants, and presentations. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We conduct evidentiary hearings on requests for variances, design adjustments, design alternates, and special use permits, among other requests. Before we begin the evidentiary hearing on today's agenda, I'd like to provide some important information about the steps taken to ensure that each party's due process rights are protected as we proceed in this remote platform. First, today's meeting will be conducted in accordance with the newly enacted statutes in Session Law 2020-3, which allow for remote meetings and quasi-judicial hearings during declarations of emergency. Second, each applicant on today's agenda was notified before being placed on the agenda that this meeting would be conducted using a remote electronic platform. Every applicant on today's agenda has consented to the board conducting the evidentiary hearing on their request using this remote platform. We will also confirm today at the start of each evidentiary hearing that the participants in the evidentiary hearing consent to the matter proceeding in this remote platform. If there is any objection to a matter proceeding in this remote platform, the case will be continued. Third, notice of this meeting was provided to the applicants and the public in numerous ways, well beyond the legal requirements for noticing this meeting and the evidentiary hearings. Specifically, notice of today's evidentiary hearings was provided by mail to all property owners within 100 feet of each subject property. The mailed notices were sent 1 week in advance of the date set by law to provide such notice, and each notice letter notified the recipient of the remote meeting platform. The letters also stated to contact the city immediately if there were any objections to the evidentiary hearing for which the notice was sent or to the remote meeting platform. I'd like to emphasize, no case is proceeding today in which the city has been contacted by an individual with an objection to the case or to the matter being heard in this remote meeting platform. Notice was also provided by positing notice on the site of each property, publishing notice in the newspaper, and providing notice on the city's website. Each of these notice methods were also done in advance of the legal requirement to provide such notice. The notices for today's meeting contain information about the means by which the public can access the remote meeting as the meeting occurs. Fourth, any individual wishing to participate in today's evidentiary hearings was required to sign up prior to the meeting to participate. Information about this sign-up requirement, along with information about how to sign up to participate, was included in the mailed notice letters sent to each property owner within 100 feet of each subject property. This information was also included on the board's website, and among other information, a link to the board's website was included in all methods of notice. Again, I emphasize, no case is proceeding today in which anyone contacted the city to voice an objection to a request or the remote meeting platform. All individuals participating in today's evidentiary hearings were also required to submit a copy of any presentation, document, exhibit, or other material that they wish to submit at the evidentiary hearing prior to today's meeting. All materials that the city received from the participants in today's cases, as well as a copy of the city staff's presentations and documents, were posted online in a board docs prior to this meeting. All materials that will be discussed today can be viewed at any time during today's meeting by visiting www.raleighNC.gov/board-adjustment and clicking the link entitled View the Agenda. Finally, all individuals who signed up to participate in an evidentiary hearing on today's agenda, as well as all city staff participants, were emailed a witness oath form prior to today's meeting. Any individual planning to testify or submit evidence in an evidentiary hearing was notified that they must sign the oath form prior to today's meeting. We will also reaffirm everyone's oath on the record at today's meeting. We will now conduct evidentiary hearings on the cases listed on the agenda. Before we begin, I would like to announce the order in which we will call the cases. Due to the remote meeting platform, we will have to rearrange the order of cases to allow for the cases for each staff presenter to be called back to back. The cases will be called in the following order. We'll begin with old business, 200 West Lane Street. 3 companion cases that will be called together for the evidentiary hearing but voted on separately are variance case BOA-0073-2019, design adjustment case A-5-20, and design alternate case A-6-20. These will be followed by new business, 3700 Lake Wheeler Road, design adjustment case A-10-20, 3402 Leonard Street, variance case BOA 0009-2020, 1924 Capitol Boulevard, variance case BOA 0006-2020, 4121 Commodity Parkway, variance case BOA 0012-2020, 3609 Brook Drive, variance case BOA 0010-2020, and 1516 Bethel Road, special use permit case BOA 0014-2020. I would like to start by swearing in all potential staff witnesses for today's cases. When I say your name, please acknowledge that you are present, and then I will administer your oath. Keegan McDonald, planning staff case presenter.
Here.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Eric Hodge, planning staff case presenter.
Hello, Eric Hodge.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Justin Rumetta, zoning administrator.
Present.
Swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meetings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And Daniel King, transportation plan review.
I'm here.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Bradley Kimbrell, transportation plan review.
Here.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to our attorney, Catherine Hoffman-Hill. For our first remote meeting, she will be conducting the evidentiary hearing for today's cases. Catherine.
Thanks, Rodney. My name is, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Catherine Hoffman-Hill. I'm the attorney for the Raleigh Board of Adjustment. Today's evidentiary hearings are going to proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. If at any time a participant has issues with technology, please send a message to the moderator. Beth Stagner, the IT Assistant Director, is moderating this meeting. The chat function has been disabled for the meeting for all participants and board members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have any technical difficulties. We'll start each evidentiary hearing by reading the list of participants who've signed up to participate in the case. I will then call each individual separately. I'll ask that you state your name as well as your address and confirm for the record your consent to proceed in this remote format. And then the board's chair will swear you in, have you reaffirm your oath on the record. Staff will then give their presentation. The board will have an opportunity to ask questions, and then it will be the applicant's case. The applicant, I will acknowledge the attorney first as the point person for your case. Attorneys, I ask that you please when you call your witnesses, please state their name and introduce them for the record. And I also ask that you pause after each witness to allow the board members to ask any questions if they have any. I'd also remind you that you've provided your potential documents, presentations, exhibits, and other materials ahead of the meeting so they can be provided on board docs, but please make sure to submit your evidence into the record when you present your case. So once all testimony is complete, we will close the evidentiary hearing. The board members will then deliberate, and the board's chair, when time, will ask for a motion. The board will vote using a roll call method, and the assistant city clerk will take the vote. So if there's any questions, then we'll go ahead and begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda. So we'll start with, as Mr. Swink said, old business. There's 3 cases. They'll be called together for purposes of conducting the evidentiary hearing, but they'll be voted on separately. So this is 200 West Lane Street. Dawson Lane LLC is the property owner applicant. Case BOA 0073-2019, design adjustment case A520, and design alternate case A620. I have 6 participants signed up for this case: Michael Birch, John Zellweger, Graham Smith, Matthew Fern, Brandy Thompson, and Russ Jones. So I'm going to go through the list and make sure everybody's here and ready to proceed before we start. So we'll start with, when I call your name, please state your name and your address for the record, and please confirm that you consent to the remote meeting, and then you'll have the oath read to you. So, Michael Birch.
Hi there, Michael Birch, 2235 Gateway Access Point, Suite 201, Raleigh 27607, and I confirm and consent to this meeting.
Mr. Birch, do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, John Zellweger.
Hello, John Zellweger with Clearscapes, 311 West Martin Street, Suite 200. And I confirm and affirm this remote meeting.
Mr. Zellweger, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, Graham Smith.
Yes, Graham Smith, Site Collaborative, 821 Wake Forest Road, Raleigh, 27604. I confirm and consent to this remote meeting.
Mr. Smith, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Matthew Fern.
Hi, Matthew Fern, Ish Delicatessen. I confirm and consent to this meeting. Sorry, my address is 715 Glasscock Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27604.
Mr. Fern, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, is Brandy Thompson on the line?
No, she is not.
Can you unmute Michael Birch, please?
Absolutely. Done.
Michael, Brandy has signed up, I believe, as a participant for the applicant.
Yes, John Zellweger and Brandy are in the same shop, so John's going to handle it.
Okay, is it possible to get her on the phone because she signed up, to get her just to confirm?
I'll defer to John. I think she may come to where John is at some point in time.
Yeah, I see you just unmuted me. I will send her a text message. She's probably hung up on a long meeting, and she may be arriving midstream, but I will make sure that I will get her to call in and acknowledge that it's all on me. Hold on a second.
Okay. We'll go ahead and do Russ Jones really quickly.
Oh, give me a second.
Hey, Russ Jones, 130 North Bloodworth Street, Raleigh 27601. Confirm and consent to this meeting.
Mr. Jones, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Jones?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Michael, since Brandy's with your case, we need her before the board can vote just to make sure that she logs in and gives the consent. So we can either proceed with the next case first, or you can proceed with your case and just make sure that before the board votes, if you think you can get her in to acknowledge that her consent and that she's doesn't have anything else to add.
Okay. John, unless you say otherwise, I mean, my thought is to go ahead and proceed, given that we've got a number of requests, and we'll see if we can pull Brandy in to do it at some point in time before the board votes.
Yes, I've already texted her, and I will continue to annoy her phone so that we can bring this to resolution.
Hey, Catherine, for a point of clarification, if John gets her on the phone, can her consent be given by voice through his audio connection?
Yes. Okay, so Keegan McDonald, I believe, is the staff person for this case. So we'll start with staff's presentation. Keegan, if you want to take it from there.
Okay. So first, I'm going to start off just by reading the agenda captions in board docs, and then I'll kind of proceed into the visual part of the presentation. So first case, BOA 0073-2019, whereas Dawson Lane LLC property owner requests a variance to section 3.3.2.b of the Unified Development Ordinance to construct a single-story general building rather than a two-story general building, and a 35 variance to section 9.5 of the Raleigh Street Design Manual to permit a driveway onto West Lane that is located 65 feet from its intersection with McDowell Street in order to construct a 5,633 square foot general building for restaurant use on a 0.2 acre property, zone DX12 UG, and located at 200 West Lane Street. Agenda item A520, whereas Dawson Lane LLC property owner requests relief from the following roadway and streetscape improvements for McDowell Street and Avenue 6-lane divided street set forth in sections 8.4.6.c, 8.5.1, and 8.5.2 of the Unified Development Ordinance and section 3.2.4.b of the Raleigh Street Design Manual. A 5.8 foot design adjustment to the requirement for a 10-foot wide sidewalk in order to permit the existing sidewalk to remain with an existing width varying between 4.2 feet to 5.1 feet. A 5-foot design adjustment to the requirement for a 6-foot wide planting area in order to provide a minimum 1-foot wide planting area but preserve existing conditions, which is still a variable width planting area. A design adjustment to the requirement to provide tree grades along North McDowell Street in order to plant trees in the existing planting strip or behind the sidewalk outside of tree grades. A design adjustment to the requirement to provide trees 40 foot on center in order to provide a total of 4 street trees through planting new trees and retaining an existing tree, spaced as shown on the site plan, and relief from the following roadway and streetscape improvements for West Lane Street and Main Street parallel parking street set forth in UDO sections 8.4.5.d and 8.5.1 and 8.5.2 and Raleigh Street Design Manual section 3.2.3.c. A 4-foot design adjustment to the minimum 36.5 foot right-of-way requirement in order to provide 33 feet of right-of-way. A 2-foot design adjustment to the requirement for a 10-foot wide sidewalk in order to provide an 8-foot sidewalk. A 2-foot design adjustment to the requirement for a 6-foot wide planting area in order to provide a 4-foot planting area, and a design adjustment to the requirement to provide trees 40 feet on center in order to provide a total of 2 street trees as shown on the site plan. in order to construct a 5,633 square foot general building for restaurant use on a 0.2 acre property zone DX12UG located at 200 West Lane Street. And then finally, A6-20, whereas Dawson Lane LLC property owner requests a 60-foot design alternate to section 8.3.5.c.3 of the UDO, which requires driveways for mixed use and non-residential uses accessing streets up to 80 feet wide to be at least 200 feet apart in order to provide a driveway on the property located 140 feet from the driveway serving the property immediately to the west, with an address of 300 North Dawson Street in order to construct a 5,633 square foot general building for restaurant use on a 0.2 acre property zone DX12UG located at 200 West Lane Street. Now I will transition to our PowerPoint presentation. So as you can see on the presentation, here is the subject property and aerial. It's an existing one-story structure proposed to be rebuilt into another one-story structure, general building for restaurant use. It's located at the intersection of West Lane and McDowell, adjacent to a hotel to the property on the west. As stated previously, the property is zoned DX12 UG. This slide shows the existing conditions and structure. This slide details the proposal. So the majority of the relief sought is related to the streetscape standards for North McDowell Street and West Lane Street. There is a desire to retain the existing conditions more or less along North McDowell Street, with minor reductions to the planting area widths, sidewalk widths, and the number of street trees that are permitted, or excuse me, required. On West Lane Street, there is reductions being requested to the streetscape requirements, again, to the sidewalk and planting area widths, and then also the number of street trees that would otherwise be required. There is also relief being sought in the form of a variance and design alternate for the existing driveway. The driveway does not comply with the city standards for spacing between the driveway and the adjacent intersection at North McDowell and West Lane Street, and also does not comply with the minimum driveway spacing requirements between it and the property to the west. The last portion of the variance that's being sought is a building height standard contained in section 3.3.2. This code section requires properties with a 12-story height designation to be a minimum of 2 stories. The applicant is requesting, of course, to just construct a 1-story structure. Here is a elevation that was provided in the application materials to kind of show what that will look like. Staff, both zoning staff, planning staff, and transportation staff do not have any immediate comments on the design alternate or design adjustment request. As it relates to the variance request, staff has only one comment on the height standard to provide a minimum of 2 stories. And again, that's because this property is zoned for 12 stories and has an urban frontage. Staff's comments is that there was nothing provided, no obvious reason provided in the application about a peculiar condition of the property that would prevent a 2-story structure. As we understand it, it is more in keeping with the desired use that they had just adhered to a 1-story structure instead of the required 2. So that is staff's only comment. I know transportation staff are available if there are any specific questions related to the transportation details. And I'm happy to answer any other questions if there are any from the board.
Thank you, McDonald. Do we have any questions from any members of the board?
Okay, I think you can move on to the applicant's case. And Michael, do you have Brandy on the phone? I think I saw that she came in. Michael Birch.
Hey, hi there. I'm not sure. I'll defer to John to see if she's now joined.
She is actually. Do you want me to unmute her to start the process to bring her in?
That'd be great.
Okay. Go ahead, Brandy.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
Hi, Brandy. This is Catherine Hoffman-Hill, the board's attorney. Really quickly, we're going to ask you to reaffirm your oath on the record. So when I state your name, can you please state your name, and provide us with your address and confirm your consent to proceed in this remote proceeding, and then we'll have the board's chair reaffirm your oath.
Excellent. Brandy Thompson, 1100 Fillmore Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27605. I do consent to participate electronically.
Okay, Ms. Thompson, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and now Michael Birch will acknowledge you as the applicant. And again, please remember to state the name of each witness if you plan to call them and introduce them so we know to transition to that witness.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Again, Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners. Just to reiterate, who's with me today is first Russ Jones, the property owner, both of this parcel and the Ish Delicatessen that's going to be built, but also the Longleaf Hotel right next door. We also have our landscape architect, Graham Smith, with Site Collaborative. The architects, John Zellweger and Brandy Thompson with Clearscapes, and then Matt Fern, who will be the owner-operator of the Ish Deli. And so what I'm going to try to do, just because this is everyone's first time through it, is I'm going to try and get everything into the record and then have our witnesses available for any questions that the board may have. Keegan, if you can go next slide. And let's see, I'm trying to, you can go to the next slide, kind of the more zoomed in aerial, one more. So again, this is just highlights the previous deli building next to the Longleaf Hotel. So I encourage you to see these properties as almost kind of operating together. The owners purchased both of these from the same previous owner, spent a significant amount of money keeping the two-story hotel next door to kind of preserve its historic character and provide a very kind of unique character to this side of downtown in terms of the hotel. I hope you had a chance to get by there before the COVID hit, but it's just a great space, and they see the deli as very much complementary and working in tandem with the hotel from a food service standpoint. The initial plan with the deli was to retain the existing building, but once they got in there and understood kind of in what bad shape it was in, they decided to demolish that building. And actually, the first iteration of the plan was to try to do a two-story building here. But after working through a number of plans and options trying to get it to work, and just could not get it to work, they landed back on a one-story plan. And I'll kind of get into some of the peculiar aspects of the property as to why that is. If you go to the next picture, again, this is just a photo looking west, kind of from the Ish Deli parcel towards the Longleaf Hotel down West Lane Street, and just to show you kind of the streetscape that really does not exist at all to the west of the site along Lane. And if you go to the next slide. This is a picture looking the other direction on West Lane to kind of see the existing conditions, which is again really it's just black asphalt, no real streetscape at all. Next slide. This is looking north on McDowell. So this is kind of where everybody picks up speed heading out of downtown northbound. Starts to go downhill. So the site's on your left. And you can see the existing sidewalk, existing grass strip, some of the trees there. And as Keegan mentioned, really our request related to McDowell Street is to preserve the streetscape that exists today with some supplement of some new street trees. Next picture. So this is a picture looking into the site from West Lane Street. You can see the hotel there on the left-hand side of the picture, and kind of the site itself there on the right-hand side. I'll note that that hotel kind of building wall right there is about 22 feet tall. Just to give you a sense as I talk about it in relationship to the proposed building and kind of the spirit, purpose, and intent with what we're doing from a height standpoint. All right, next slide, please. So this is the site plan. You'll notice kind of because we're in the DX district, all of our outdoor amenity area has to be at the ground level outside. That's what you see between the building and the corner of the property. So activating that corner, creating a really unique space as folks are driving by out of downtown. On the west side of the building, that is largely existing asphalt, but set aside for cross access to the hotel parcel and also access for refuse collection and deliveries to the restaurant. And then you'll note just along West Lane Street, they're working with Bradley Kimbrell, Tara Hoffer with transportation. We came up with kind of a compromise streetscape there, operating within the Christmas plan dimensions to provide that new streetscape, 8-foot wide sidewalk, 4-foot planting area with the street trees. And just one note, following up what Keegan said about our requests related to McDowell and to Lane, we're not asking for a reduction in the number of street trees. We're asking only for spacing, design adjustment related to spacing, that they're not necessarily 40 feet on center. In some cases, they have to be closer than that. But the overall number of street trees is still being provided. Next slide, please. So this slide again shows just kind of a view from West Lane Street of that existing building. And then the next slide. This is a view of that existing building from McDowell Street. Next slide. So this is the proposed building kind of near the intersection of West Lane and McDowell looking north. So again, you can see kind of what a unique building that Clearscapes has designed with all that transparency at the corner and that kind of activity spilling out towards the corner, creating a really unique visual there. And you'll kind of notice that architectural feature that kind of ramps up from on the front of the building. And if you can go to the next slide there. This kind of shows some different views. That one in the top right-hand corner, that's the east elevation, kind of looking from McDowell. And you'll see that, again, that architectural feature kind of going up off the building. And you'll note also the height of the building. So just while we're on this slide, I noted that and this is kind of in relationship to our variance request related to 1-story versus the requirement for a 2-story building. As I mentioned, the existing hotel right next door is that wall there closest to the site is 22 feet in height. The building here is approximately 20 feet in height, and actually relative to average grade is taller than that. I believe just 23.5 feet from existing grade. And so actually, given the finished floor elevation of the proposed building, this deli building, that portion, that kind of architectural feature will actually be just about a foot taller than the roof of the hotel. So in terms of kind of the spirit, purpose, and intent of creating that kind of consistent street wall, that urban street wall, from a height standpoint, we think we're achieving that through that portion of the building, that architectural feature that will actually be taller than the hotel closest to the deli building. Again, from the kind of unnecessary hardship that's peculiar to the property. Again, I mentioned, just note the size of the parcel, right around 0.2 acres, so a very small parcel. The fact that our current zoning requires the outdoor amenity area to be on the ground floor, which limits our footprint. That area has to be set aside for cross access, further limits the building footprint. The shape of the parcel is odd. It kind of narrows as it heads north. And that's also where the property starts to drop off again as you start going out of town, kind of as McDowell goes south. The property itself drops about 7 to 8 feet from West Lane to the back of the property. And a lot of that is right there towards the back of the property again, which kind of further limits the building footprint of the building there. And so as they were trying to accommodate all the site constraints and all the code requirements and also accessibility to a second story of the building, they just could not get it all to fit in a practical way. And so there is unnecessary hardship in providing that second story. It is a result of things that are peculiar to the property, its size, shape, topography. Would also note that it is not a result of the actions of the owner. The city, through the remapping process, zoned this property with a 12-story district and an urban frontage. And it is those two things that is requiring or imposing that 2-story minimum. And then from a spirit, purpose, and intent, again, creating that kind of consistent street wall from a height standpoint. I've noted that we're doing that through the building height. And I'll also note if you take the Longleaf Hotel and this parcel together, the requirement for that 2-story minimum is for it to be 75% of the building's linear kind of wall along the street. For 75% of that building linear footage. The hotel itself is all 2 stories and is about 245 feet long. This 1-story building is about 36 feet wide. Therefore, 87% of the buildings along this block face, 87% are at that 2-story minimum. So when you're looking at the block as a whole, we are over that 75% requirement. So we think we're achieving the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance on that point. That's kind of the comments related to the building height variance, the driveway variance. Keegan, if you could go back up to the, I guess the aerial, zoom in aerial, about the 3rd slide.
I apologize, just a little bit of delay in getting to the previous slide.
Okay, no worries. While that's going on, I'll just say we are retaining, there are 2 driveways on the site today. We are closing the one that is closest to the intersection. And I believe narrowing up a little bit the driveway to the west, but maintaining that existing driveway, the westernmost driveway. That will be the property's access point. It's located as far away from the intersection as possible. And so complying with that distance would be a hardship in that it would lose an access point, any access point directly to West Lane Street. We don't have any access to McDowell Street. And again, that doesn't result from, those are existing conditions, not the result of action of the owner. And from a spirit, purpose, and intent standpoint, we're setting that as far away as possible from the intersection. Going next to the 8.4 and 8.5 design adjustments. Keegan did a good job of summarizing the requests related to McDowell Street. And again, the requests that are in front of you now are the result of working with transportation over the last few months, coming up with kind of something that they could support as well. And so McDowell, we are really looking to maintain the existing streetscape. We are adding, again, some new street trees along that area, but because of power lines, et cetera, they just have to be clustered, not a uniform 40-foot on center. And West Lane Street, again, we are providing something close and comparable to what the downtown master plan and the required streetscape would be, with just a 2-foot reduction in the sidewalk width, 2-foot reduction in the planting area, and because of some underground utilities having to cluster those trees together. We've provided responses to the design adjustment standards as to how we meet the intent of the article, conforms with the comp plan and adopted plans, doesn't increase or compromise safety. It's been designed and certified by a professional engineer. Again, these are appropriate because we're transitioning from two different street sections, certainly both along McDowell and West Lane. And then last, I will focus on the 8.3 design adjustment, which relates to the distance between the existing driveway on the Longleaf Hotel site to the west, and then the driveway that we are retaining on the Ish Deli parcel. We're requesting a 60-foot design adjustment there, meaning that those driveways are 140 feet apart. Again, it meets the intent of the article, which is to provide safe, efficient, convenient access by spacing them far away as possible, given their existing conditions and the intersection of McDowell. Doesn't increase congestion or compromise safety. We are providing cross access, and then it's reasonable given the physical constraints of the properties. So with that is kind of our affirmative case testimony. Would ask that you accept all of our filing materials and items we've provided to the board and to staff into the record in our application. And again, our landscape architect, building architects, and owner and operator are here if the board has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Do any board members have any questions?
Michael, can I ask a quick clarifying question? The last driveway spacing you were asking, you were saying design adjustment. Was that your design alternate?
That was the that was the 8.3 design alternate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any board questions? Mr. Birch, I guess if there's no questions, we're no need to hear from any of your other members of your team unless there's something specific they would like to add.
No, I don't believe so at this point.
Okay. Is there anyone?
Rodney,
Yes.
Rodney, it looks like Kathy is trying to ask a question. She's
Okay.
not muted. Kathy, can we hear from you? We cannot hear you, and you're not. Try now.
Beth, do you have a phone number you can try calling Kathy to see if she can speak through the phone?
Kathy, if you can send me through the chat, we can get you. I've seen in some instances where your thing may say muted and it may not be. So if you can switch it and try to talk. We did hear her earlier, though.
I'm not sure if she's trying to speak to us. I think, Mr. Swink, I think you can go ahead and ask too while we're waiting to see if you can get Kathy, if there's anybody else that's here to speak in support or opposition to the request. Again, we've had nobody sign up in opposition, but I would just ask the participants as well.
That's right. Well, it's heading in that direction. I didn't realize Ms. Rudisell might have had a question. If she does, we'll give her that opportunity. So is there anyone here who wishes to speak in support of this request? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? No?
So Catherine, I don't have everybody unmuted. So if you want me to unmute people specifically.
I would unmute all the participants. And I think, again, Michael has confirmed that the participants were all with him for this case. So I think that I would also ask if staff has any additional questions as well, or anything else they would like to add. So that would be Keegan.
Staff.
Kathy has asked her question. So Kathy's question is for Keegan. What's the rationale for the 2-story requirement?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not really much provided verbatim in the code. Typically, each code section does contain a kind of purpose and intent statement. Our understanding of the minimum 2-story requirement is related to creating a street wall, kind of like Michael touched upon. Essentially, a large swath of downtown is zoned for fairly tall buildings, and there is a desire ultimately, or at least the option ultimately, for all of those parcels to be developed fully to the maximum height allowance. And I think the intention there is in some of these districts, and I'll try to scroll back and see if I can go to this code section call out, but in these districts that do have rather tall height allowances, there is a minimum put in place. And I think the intention, as I read the code, is to just create some uniformity such that you don't have buildings that seem to tower over other smaller structures, and more or less promote a greater degree of density and height in these downtown areas or other places that have a large height allowance.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I would just ask too, before you proceed any further, Kathy, I think that our moderator is going to try to get you some audio. If you can give her a phone number. If you have any additional questions, please let us know. We want to make sure we get audio for you as well, so we can be compliant with the new general statute that was enacted.
Okay. Okay, so Mr. Birch, I assume there'll be no rebuttal since there was nothing raised in the way of an issue. Staff, anything further you want to add to this?
I just want to try. Kathy, you're going to need to probably only listen to the audio through your phone now, rather than also through your computer. So you might just need to turn off the audio on your computer and just visually watch that and participate audio through the phone.
28.
Can we try you again, Kathy? Kathy?
Yeah, I did it.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Kathy, for working that out. Thanks, Beth. Okay, if there's no other comment, questions, or board questions, we will close this evidentiary hearing. And I would remind you, we're having 3 separate cases here, so we're going to need 3 separate votes, and we'll be voting by roll call from our assistant city clerk. So first, before we do that, we'll have board deliberations. So any comments? We'll take first the variance case, 200 West Lane, the variance, the first item. We'll discuss that one, and I will, if you have no comments, I will entertain a motion from anyone.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry if I may really quickly as well.
Please.
You have one regular member who is absent, and that's Justin Sutton. He's a city regular, and so I think Ralph Beth has something to add as well. So you have 2 alternates here, Stephen Kenny and Michael Rainey. I believe Eric, yes. Usually you need to choose which one of those 2 is going to vote as in place of Justin's seat. So if you want to alternate between the two cases, it's up to you. I would defer to what you would like to do. And I think that the Assistant City Clerk, Ralph, would like to add something as well.
Yes, could you remove the presentation because I cannot see everybody?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was going to raise the question about the alternate when we got to the vote, because I understand everyone can deliberate, but thank you for reminding me nonetheless. So for this first item, Mr. Kenny, would you be the voting member on this first item, the variance, please? And again, we're open for deliberation, but I will also accept a motion.
John Koontz, motion to approve.
I second the motion.
Who was the second, please?
Steve Kenny.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kenny. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hey, Mr. Puccini, would you then call the roll?
All right, Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Mr. Swink, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Let's see. Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you. And Ms. Redisell.
Approve.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Let's move to the second item, which is the design adjustment for 200 West Lane Street. Again, we'll have any board deliberation, or I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Kenny, would you continue in your role in this item, please, since I didn't state that earlier? We'll let you carry these first three cases.
Sure. Approve.
We're not voting just yet.
Oh.
Okay, thank you.
Jump the gun.
All right, that's all right.
okay.
I'm all for moving along. Okay, we have a second from Ms. Rudisell. Is there any further discussion? Hey, Mr. Puccini?
Thank you. Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Ms. Redisell.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Thank you. And Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Third item on this was the design alternate. Discussions or a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz. We have a second.
Second.
Mr. Mile, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll have the vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Mr. Mile.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you. Ms. Redisell.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we worked through the first one. Good job, everybody. A little technical difficulties, but we made it. Thank you all. Let's move on, Catherine, to the second hearing item, please.
Great, thank you. The second item is on new business, 3700 Lake Wheeler Road. This is the Point Church of the Triangle. It's a request for design adjustments in case A1020. We have 5 participants signed up for this case: Nicholas Carr, Mark Casper, Jeremy Hyde, Jason Beavers, and Bruce Beavers. When I say your name, please state your name and address, and please confirm for the record your consent to proceeding with this remote meeting, and then the chair will reaffirm your oath on the record. And I have oaths from all 5 participants that were submitted prior to this meeting. So we'll start with Nicholas Carr.
Yes, my name is Nicholas Carr. My address is 6739 Falls Moose Road in Raleigh, North Carolina, 27615. And I do consent to the remote meeting.
Mr. Carr, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
A question, please, Mr. Carr. How do you spell your last name?
Karr.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark Casper, I think, Caspar.
That is correct, yes. This is Mark Casper. I'm at 312 Grand High Clear Way, and that's at Apex, North Carolina, 27523.
And can you please confirm your consent to proceed with the remote meeting?
I confirm my remote meeting.
Mr. Casper, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy Hyde.
Jeremy Hyde. My address is 1503 Walnut Street, Cary, North Carolina, 27511.
And can you please state your consent to proceed with the remote meeting format?
I confirm my consent to proceed with the remote meeting format.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
Jason Beavers.
I confirm my consent.
And can you please give your address as well?
It is 801 Jones Franklin Road, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27606, Suite 300.
Hey, Mr. Beavers, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and then we have Bruce Beavers.
Yes, this is Bruce Beavers. I'm at 801 Jones Franklin Road, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27606, and I do consent to this remote meeting.
Mr. Beavers, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Catherine, apologies for interrupting, but Chair Swank and Catherine, board member Marvin Butler had to leave the meeting due to another one that he had with work, but he messaged me and asked me to relay that to both you.
Thank you. And I think he was the alternate for Donald. So as long as Donald is still here, we are good to continue proceeding.
Thank you.
I believe the staff person for this one is Keegan McDonald. So you can start with your presentation.
Yes, thank you. So as with last time, I will just give a readout of the request and then proceed into the presentation. A10-20, whereas the Point Church of the Triangle property owner requests relief from the following roadway and streetscape improvements for Lake Wheeler Road, an avenue 2-lane divided street set forth in section 8.4.5.b of the UDO, an 8-foot design adjustment to retain the existing 60-foot right-of-way, a 6-foot design adjustment from the minimum 6-foot planting area requirement, a 6-foot design adjustment from the minimum 6-foot sidewalk requirement, a 2-foot design adjustment from the minimum 2-foot maintenance strip requirement, and a 5-foot design adjustment from the minimum 5-foot utility easement requirement in order to subdivide one lot into two on a 5.9 acre property zoned R1 and SWPOD located at 3700 Lake Wheeler Road. So now I will move into the presentation. Just give me one moment, please. Okay, presentation should be up now. So as you can see, the subject property is a rural parcel. Currently situated on the property are a church, some accessory structures, and I believe a residence, and they are all on one lot of record. What is initiating the need for design adjustment in this instance is a proposed subdivision of this property to separate out both primary or principal buildings, and both primary uses, one being the residence, the other being the church or place of worship. Here is the existing survey of the property. So that dividing line that you do see is an easement, but they are this is just one property that contains, again, both principal buildings. The proposal is to subdivide, shown there in the black line, The intent of this design adjustment is really to preserve all of the existing conditions along Lake Wheeler Road. Again, it is kind of a rural roadway at the moment. The street typology does call for some additional streetscape improvements. And so in addition to retaining the existing right-of-way, they also are seeking not to provide a sidewalk, planting area, or utility easement along Lake Wheeler. And that is the basically the summary of their requests. I will note that transportation staff has reviewed the request to make sure it is complete and accurate, and that they are requesting the exact relief needed. It's my understanding they don't have any comment on the application, and neither do zoning staff, but they are here to answer any questions you may have. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Any questions for Mr. McDonald? No? Let's move on to the applicant, please.
I would start, Mr. Chair, by recognizing Nicholas Carr as the point person, the attorney for the case. To again, please state the name of any witnesses before you and introduce them before they speak.
Thank you.
That's great. My name is Nicholas Carr. I am the attorney for the Point Church of the Triangle. I am also an elder at the Point Church of the Triangle. They've asked me to represent them in this case. The property here, this is not the first time that we've been in front of the board for this parcel. In the past, we've asked for a variance that was granted a couple years ago as well. Just a brief history of this parcel. The church and the cemetery especially date back to the Civil War times. There are several Civil War descendants and soldiers that are actually buried in that cemetery. When the Point Church of the Triangle began operating the site, we noticed that there was some deterioration of the cemetery, specifically that fixture. And you may notice it's right in the middle of the plot, just south of where our proposed subdivide line is. It's that rectangular shape that's there. We erected a fence, the Point Church erected a fence there to protect some of the gravestones. There were people who were actually parking almost right up onto the gravestones themselves. And so to preserve those interned there, they wanted to get that fence up. At the time, they were not aware that a permit needed to be pulled for that. They were cited, and we asked for a variance for two reasons. One, our fence encroached into the right-of-way of Lake Wheeler Road, which became a problem for the DOT. And then as well, they asked for several planting areas and green space, shrubbery put in front of that fence as required under the UDO. That relief was granted that we did not have to put that up in front of the fence, specifically because it would be encroaching into the NCDOT's right of way. They did give us an encroachment agreement so that we could have the fence in their right of way, specifically because there are several graves that actually encroach into the right of way itself. As I said, this cemetery has been there for some time now, and those in turn, our main goal was to protect them. Which brings us to today and the request that we have. The Point Church of the Triangle, the Board of Elders, which is the controlling authoritative board at our church, is trying to provide some financial flexibility for operations and things going forward. Today we have with us Mark Casper and Jeremy Hyde, who are both executive director and executive pastor of the Point Church. They have asked us to go forward in subdividing this parcel specifically to allow us that financial flexibility, either A, into selling off the residence that Keegan mentioned, which is a parsonage. It has been used as a parsonage both by us and by previous operators of the church building, as a rental or a flex space for further ministry. We found that it would be advantageous for our church to have that subdivided and separate from the general ministry space that's there, which has the church, our storage area, and the cemetery itself. Applying for that subdivision, we are asking for relief specifically for the 6-foot sidewalk, 6-foot planting area, 2-foot maintenance easement, and the 5-foot utility easement. As Keegan mentioned a few times there, this is a very rural area. There are cows behind us, and there are cows across the street from us. The area itself, if you look around, there aren't those other types of fixtures that are there. Further north are several other residential homes that are just like the parsonage that we have here in place. The problem that we have is the cemetery. Once again, is becoming a problem for being able to grant these items. Practically speaking, there are a few sections. Section 8.36A, Section B gives some reasons why we would be able to get that design adjustment that we are requesting. Specifically in Section G, it talks about freeways, waterways, railroads, pre-existing development, tree conservation areas, buffers, and cemeteries that might make a complete block under the UDO that Keegan mentioned feasible. For us, specifically with this rural area, the cemetery is a very important asset for us to protect for those interned. There have been several meetings in the area and in the community to make sure that we still provide maintenance of that cemetery and access to that cemetery. We do not believe that, given the location of the cemetery, its pre-existing nature, and it's already encroaching onto the roadway, to be able to grant the sidewalk planting area and other things that are required under the UDO is feasible. We do not think that that is the case because of its location there. Even to grant access across and through the cemetery is not very practical, specifically because where the graves are located, there are several rows that are there. That's the basic crux of why we are asking for relief today. Of course, we do have Jason and Bruce Beavers, who are part of the Stantec site developers, who can answer a few more questions if there are any. Thank you for having us today and for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Board members, any questions for Mr. Carr or any of his other witnesses? No? Staff, do you have any questions that are raised on what you've heard?
This is Keegan. I do not have any additional comment.
Thank you. Okay. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this request? Or anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Hearing none, then let us close the evidentiary hearing and move to board deliberations. And this is 3700 Lake Wheeler Road, A10-20. I'll take comments, questions, or a motion. Mr. Koontz?
I don't have any questions. I think it's pretty clear and simple. I don't have a problem with this at all. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Incidentally, excuse me for not stating this sooner, but well, Mr. Rainey, will you be our alternate for this case? I apologize for not alerting you sooner.
Sure thing.
The hang of this. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion for Mr. Koontz. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Who was the first? When you second, please.
I heard Mr. Mile first.
Thank you, Mr. Mile, for your second. Any further discussion? If not, we will take a roll call.
Mr. Koontz? Okay.
We gotta hear you. You're on mute.
He's muted.
My mouse went on hiatus. Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Mile?
Yes.
Thank you. Chairman Swink?
Approve.
Thank you. Ms. Rittisell?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey.
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Carr, for being with us today. On to case hearing number 3.
Thank you. The third case is 3402 Leonard Street. The property owners are Alexander and Morgan Butts. The variance request or case is BOA 009-2020. And we have two people sign up to participate in this case, Cecile Richardson and Alex Butts. And again, when I call your name, please state your name and address for the record, and please also confirm your consent to the remote meeting platform. And then the chair will reaffirm your oath. And I have oath forms that were submitted prior to this meeting for both of these participants. So we'll start with Celie Richardson.
Yes, my name is Celie Richardson. That's CELIE. And my address is P.O. Box 2585, Chapel Hill 27515. And I consent to this remote video format.
Ms. Richardson, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and Alex Butts.
Yes, my name is Alex Butts. My address is 3402 Leonard Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27607. And I do consent to this electronically.
Thank you, Mr. Butts. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. McDonald.
Yes, so I will begin again just by reading the agenda caption for this request. BOA 0-0009-2020, whereas Alexander and Morgan Butts property owners request a 1-foot variance to the rear yard setback requirements set forth in section 2.2.1.b.4 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to construct an addition that results in a rear yard setback of 29 feet in conjunction with an attached house on a 0.31 acre property zoned R4 located at 3402 Leonard Street. Now I'll begin the presentation. So here is the subject property. It's located on the corner of Dogwood Lane and Leonard Street. Apologies. The property is zoned R4. Here is the existing site survey. So of note, and as detailed in the application, a portion of the existing structure, both a enclosed garage and breezeway, actually are situated beyond the required setback. The breezeway and garage were approved via a variance back in 1989. However, the applicant is before you today because their intention is to fill in the existing portion of the breezeway. And as you can see in the next slide a little bit more clearly, there is a sliver that exists outside of the existing setback. So to fill in the structure between the primary residence and this existing enclosed garage will require filling in what is a fairly narrow strip, estimated to be about 6 inches, but advertised or put in the request as 1 foot, just to provide some wiggle room to the applicant. But filling in this portion of the residence would does require a variance because this small sliver is situated outside the required setback. And thus the addition will be about 6 inches to 1 foot further into the setback than required. So here is the existing roof plan. As you can see, the kind of middle image probably gives you the best understanding of that breezeway and the enclosed garage. As you're looking from Dogwood, the proposal will completely fill in that kind of U-shaped space, empty space that currently sits there. And there will be a new addition converting the garage into additional habitable space. And then there will also be an addition on top of the primary structure, the principal structure. And that's probably better shown to you by this image. The central or middle image shows the existing Leonard elevation. The bottom image shows the proposed elevation. Again, there'll be a substantial addition, both kind of vertically and laterally. Just wanted to provide some commentary that staff had related to the variance standards. So for the first standard, that unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance, we wanted to note that the applicant is also proposing to add a second level and an addition towards Dogwood Lane. And so this image, you can see how that addition will kind of branch out towards Dogwood Lane in keeping with or within the allowed setback. There is substantial kind of buildable area on the site within the allowed setback. We understand that there is an existing structure there, and it may be more conducive to their plans to fill in the site, but staff just wanted to make the comment that there already is a proposal to add in that direction. And then there's other, buildable area on the site that wouldn't necessitate granting a variance, despite, how small that margin is. Standard number 2, the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. Staff has no comment. On hardship standard number 3, that it did not result, hardship does not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. Staff's comment is that the existing breezeway and garage are legal non-conforming structures that can remain in place. Again, additions elsewhere on the property would not necessitate altering these in any way. The 4th standard, that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Setback regulations are intended to provide adequate and uniform spacing between structures, both on the property and between on adjacent properties. And while the expansion will not substantially increase the amount of conditioned space within the required setback, it will result in the garage being converted to a more livable space, and thus could be viewed as an intensification of the use. So that kind of concludes our commentary. I'm happy to take any questions from the board at this time.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. McDonald?
So Keegan, this is John. So this is already, I guess, legally non-conforming, and it's just what's triggering it is this application, correct?
So what's specifically triggering it is this small sliver here. If you can see my annotation, that triangle piece is the only portion that remains that will be outside of the setback that isn't already of a legal non-conforming nature, because the breezeway and garage were approved by separate means. So yes, a large majority of this addition will be within the required setback, but it is this small sliver that's necessitating some relief.
Other questions? No? Okay, let us hear from Ms. Richardson, the applicant's representative.
Yes, again, this disembodied voice is Celie Richardson. The request, as Keegan said, is for about a 6-inch wide strip tapers, and the 1 foot would be useful, with the purpose to fill in the interior breezeway. The project can be done in addition to the house when leaving the breezeway, but it's an awkward space. It's not wide enough to even put a couple of lawn chairs or a grill very easily, and so the butts we leased to fill that in as part of their project. Next slide, please. Next slide, Keegan. Yeah, some of this has already been gone over, but this house was acquired by Mr. and Mrs. Butts in May of last year. Next slide, please. And as Keegan said, any expansion would be in full compliance with the UDO, except for this slight encroachment. I do note that the Butts are looking toward a one-story addition, and rather than a two-story addition at this point. They bought the house with the idea that to add on to it, Mrs. Butts is pregnant, expecting a baby this fall. They bought this house in this neighborhood because this is home to them. They have family nearby. They wanted to raise their children in this kind of neighborhood near their family, and they thought that this would be in compliance. When they had the survey done, they discovered this 6-inch sliver that is just outside the setback, just inside the setback. Next slide, please. I'm going to let Mr. Butts describe the details of the project, but before I do that, I just do want to mention a few things. One, that they are looking for the one-story rather than the two-story, and if with either the one-story or the two-story, they would either have to leave the small sliver or give up considerable space to accommodate the sliver, and have a very awkward and ugly portion of the house to accommodate the 6-inch sliver. And one other issue that has been raised is possible converting of the garage to heated space. This is not their intent. The garage under either of their plans would remain a garage used by for them for storage of yard equipment, a workbench, for other things that people normally use garages for. So just to make sure that those are understood. And now I will let Mr. Butts describe and show you the on-the-ground aspect of this. And so I'll turn this over to Alex Butts.
Thank you, Seeley. Good afternoon, board members, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to hear this case today. As has been previously stated, this request is for a rear setback variance, which would allow us to fill in an existing breezeway. In the picture you see before you, this is the home as it currently sits. This is the view from Leonard Street, looking directly at the front of the house. As you can see, the house sits pretty far back in the left corner of the lot. Our plans for the addition are to fill in the breezeway, if approved, as well as build out towards Dogwood Lane, which would be on the right-hand side of your screen over there where you see the white car. Next slide, please. This photo is taken from the corner of the property. This would be the corner of Leonard and Dogwood. And this gives a little bit better view of the side of the house. In the back of the picture, you can see the garage and a space between the garage and the house. This is the breezeway that we would like to fill in. Next slide, please. This photo is taken from the corner of the property, the back corner of the property, the corner from the rear setback line on Dogwood Street. So this is basically standing in my neighbor's driveway on Dogwood, looking towards the property. This picture provides a better view of the garage and the breezeway. You can also see the area between the garage and the property line of the neighbor, and this area would remain unchanged. Next slide, please. This is just a photo that shows the back of the property. Next slide, please. Now that you have seen the property a little bit, I would like to talk a little bit more about the reason for the variance request. The breezeway is located between the garage and the house. Currently, its dimensions are 9 feet wide by 18 feet long. There is a section in the back right corner of the breezeway that is about 6 inches wide by 10 feet long and falls inside at the rear yard setback. Keegan, if you could please move forward 3 slides. So this is the survey my wife and I had completed in October of 2019. Looking at this slide, Leonard Street is at the bottom of the picture and Dogwood Lane is on the right-hand side. You're also able to see the breezeway between the house and the garage. And I'll show you a little bit better view of that on the next slide. Keegan, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is a little bit more of a blown up version of the last slide. This gives a better view of the breezeway and a rear setback line. It is difficult to see, but we have colored in the area that is the cause for the variance request in red. On the slide, in what is now the garage, we have also added a red arrow that points to this area to provide better visibility. Now I would like to go back and give you a better visual of the breezeway itself. Keegan, if you can move back 3 slides, please. This photo shows the breezeway looking in from the driveway. As you can see, the area has almost no function, as it's too small to gather in, to put any chairs or anything in. And due to the overhang of the roof, as well as the position of the house, it stays shaded and pretty dark almost all of the day. Next slide, please. This photo shows the breezeway from about 7 feet out into the driveway. As you can see, again, the area serves little purpose currently, and we are limited to what we can use the space for due to its size. This photo gives a good visual on the area, which is the cause for the variance. Looking at the picture, the rear setback line runs along the side of the garage, which is the structure on the right. And it actually starts out slightly inside of the garage until about 10 feet away from the blue door you see. This is where it begins to cross into the breezeway, maxing out at a width of about 6 inches and continuing to run through the door and the property. With that, I would like to turn this back over to my attorney, Celie Richardson.
Thank you again. This is Celie Richardson. Next slide, please, Keegan. And 3 slides up. Sorry, there we go. This is the, just for the board's information, this is the previous approval that provided to us by Mr. Hodge and Mr. McDonald when we had our meeting, just for FYI. Next slide, please. Again, the 1-story and 2-story, just to summarize quickly, are both in compliance with the UDO. We were not able to proceed on this because our contractors need information on how they can build and whether the variance will be granted before giving quotes. Next slide, please. Okay, Alex, would you describe the alternatives? Alex.
When my wife
Alex,
and I,
you there? You there?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Alex.
Okay, thank you. When my wife and I first got started on ideas for this project, we were unsure on if we would be going up with the addition and turning into a 2nd story, or going out to the side with the addition. Once we discovered the issue with the rear setback, discussions with contractors became very difficult because they needed more information and clarification from us in the city prior to being able to provide any sort of accurate estimates. At the time that we submitted this variance request back in January or early February, we had a meeting and spoke with city planners and found that it was best that we submit plans that show both options. This was referred to as a worst case scenario. Since this time, we have decided that our preference would be to stay on one level and to add the addition going out towards Dogwood Lane instead of adding a 2nd story. This decision came through basically wanting to be in line with the neighborhood. If you go up throughout the neighborhood, most of these houses are 1 story and have been here for quite a while. So we want to keep with the feel of the neighborhood, and we feel that doing one story would achieve this in the best way. Let's see. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can, I'm sorry, can you go back one slide? Okay. Yeah, on this slide, you can see the survey of the existing property. In red on the right side of the survey, you can see a drawing that depicts the basic idea that we would like our project to encompass. This involves filling in the breezeway and then building out towards Dogwood Lane for the addition. As was mentioned previously by Seeley, we have no plan to make any changes to the garage at all at this point. Next slide, please. This slide shows the existing footprint of the house at the top and then goes on to show what the view would be from the side. I believe this is from Dogwood looking towards the property. Next slide, please. This slide again shows the existing footprint of the house and what the potential view post-project would be. This view is looking from Leonard Street. Next slide, please. Now I would like to walk you through the two-story alternative that we had submitted originally. However, again, since that time, our focus and preference has shifted to the one-story addition. This is the view of the two-story alternative, as well as the addition towards Dogwood. This is the view of the worst-case scenario that shows both going up and out. This particular view is from the front, from Leonard Street, looking toward the property. Next slide, please. This is an alternate view of the previous slide. This is showing the same thing as the previous slide, but it's showing it from Dogwood Lane. Next slide, please. At this point in time, I would like to turn things back over to my attorney. Thank you very much.
And this is Seeley Richardson again. We will summarize briefly to respond to the ordinance factors. This is, we believe that denial would cause an unnecessary hardship. The breezeway is too small. If it's denied, then he can still do the addition, but it will be left with an awkward and unusable space, in which would be difficult to build, difficult to adapt into a building. Next slide, please. And the breezeway is peculiar, not only peculiar to the property, but peculiar to this house and not the property itself. So even more compliance with the standard. Next slide, please. And again, this was not created by the owners, and they stopped immediately when they discovered the issue to come before this board to get approval. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And it's consistent with the UDO. Public safety is not implicated. The view from the adjacent yards will be changed. No change in use at all. The garage will be left as a garage. There are no plans to change anything regarding that. So there wouldn't be any change in density. It would just be a slightly larger house in the overall project. That's totally in compliance with the UDO, totally within the setbacks, except for this 6-inch sliver. And that is why we are here today, to ask for this, and for the 1 foot would be preferable, 1 foot variance from the backyard setback in order to fill in the breezeway completely. And that is our request. We ask that the materials that we've submitted be included in the record, and that the variance be approved. And we are open for any questions by the board, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Are any questions for Ms. Richardson or Mr. Butts? Anyone on the board have a question? Hearing none. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in support of this application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Okay, let's close the evidentiary hearing then, and we'll bring it.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just make sure to ask if staff had anything else to add as well after the applicant presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to read every line I'm missing, so I apologize.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. McDonald, do you have any further comment or questions?
Just, I guess, a point of clarification. I did make a comment during my presentation that it was staff's understanding that the garage space would be eliminated and potentially used for more livable space. We were relying upon this elevation. So that was just our understanding based on the elevation, but it appears, according to Mr. Butts and Ms. Richardson, that the intention is still to preserve that space as a garage. So I just wanted to point out that for clarity, we were just relying upon the information that was submitted.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I apologize, I skipped over you there. So that, and we've asked for public comment and we received none, we can close the evidentiary hearing. Mr. Kenny, you'll now be our alternate for this deliberation, please. And we will take any board discussion or a motion. I will offer a motion that we approve this application for a variance. Is there a second?
John Coons, second.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. Any further discussion? Let's take a roll call vote, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Mr. Coons.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you. Ms. Rittisell.
Approve.
Thank you. And Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, applicant, Mr. Butts and Ms. Richardson. Let's move on to evidentiary hearing number 4.
Okay, the fourth evidentiary hearing is 1924 Capitol Boulevard. Bank Central Inc. is the property owner applicant. It's variance case BOA 0006-2020. 3 people signed up to participate in this evidentiary hearing: Toby Coleman, Megan Weeks, and Soretta Amos. Again, when I state your name, please, and again, all 3 of these participants have previously submitted an oath form to the city prior to this meeting. When I state your name, please give us your address and confirm for the record your consent to proceed with the remote meeting.
Catherine, hold on a second. We do have Daniel trying to get on, and I think once we started the meeting and started recording, it may have locked him out. So let me see if I can invite him and get him in. If all else fails, Toby, we can always call him to hear from him as well.
Who was that person you're asking?
Daniel Matula?
I think that's for the next case.
Okay.
This case we have.
You keep going forward then.
Okay, great. So Toby Coleman.
Toby Coleman, 150. Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street.
And can you state your consent to continue with the remote meeting procedure?
Yes. Yes, I'm here representing the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina, and I do consent to proceeding with a remote hearing.
Mr. Coleman, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next person is Megan Weeks.
Hi, yes, my address is 5066 Jalen Street, Raleigh, North Carolina 27616, and I confirm my consent to this meeting.
Ms. Weeks, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And then Soretta Amos.
Speaking.
This is Soretta Amos, 150 Fayetteville Street, and I do affirm or consent to this virtual hearing.
Ms. Amos, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're switching to Eric Hodge as the staff presenter for this case and the rest of the cases.
Okay, BOA 0006-2020 at 1924 Capitol Boulevard. Again, the applicant is the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina. They are requesting a variance to sections 7.3.2 and 7.3.9 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to permit the construction of a new medium profile ground sign on the property zoned CX7UL, and a small portion at the rear is zoned R10. It's a 10.87 acre tract, again located at 1924 Capitol Boulevard. So the subject property is just where the Wake Forest Road, north of the Wake Forest Road, split off of Capitol Boulevard, just south of its intersection with Crabtree Boulevard, former site of Raleigh Indoor Flea Market, and for several years has been operating as the food bank of North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina. Central and Eastern. So the property, as you see, has the urban limited frontage, which is what's causing the need for this variance request. Here's the aerial showing the building at the rear of the site, and they're seeking permission to put a sign out near the street there on Capitol Boulevard, a medium profile ground sign with the name of the operations there on the site. The property again, the urban limited frontage prohibits both medium and high profile ground signs. The applicants have been operating on this site for several years. They have wall signs, however, they have no freestanding signage, and they're requesting a variance to do so. Would note that per Article 3.4 of the Unified Development Ordinance, that the urban limited frontage is intended for areas where you have buildings rather close to the street, and you don't have parking between the building and the street, and you create more of an urban kind of street wall, streetscape atmosphere where signage would typically be mounted on the building. However, unfortunately, here we have a situation where the existing development on the site, which was predating the application of the urban limited frontage on the property, has a building that's really considered non-conforming. It does not have the proximity to the street that would otherwise be called for, which the code sort of assumes that would be the case and therefore prohibits different type of freestanding signage from co-locating on these properties. Unfortunately, section 6.1.5.g of the Unified Development Ordinance explicitly states prohibited uses include a sign not explicitly allowed in the zoning district noted in the table of signs allowed by districts from section 7.3.2 or any signs erected in violation of Article 7.3 signs. And so this, sorry, there's a hair trigger on this slide presentation. But this is the section that we're coming up against where I would note that the board has made some allowances in the past for this type of variance. Staff is pointing this out again. We have a new board. And we also have a new zoning administrator who I've been in contact with recently on this particular matter. And he believes that these signs, as stated here, are considered a prohibited use. So it's his opinion, I believe, he can speak for himself, he's on the call, but that a variance of this sort would be considered a use variance, which the board does not have the authority to grant. Here's the table. Again, what we're looking at is this urban limited column over on the right in the pink. And when you go down into, I apologize, I don't know if you can see it, but my image is blocking that portion of the slide. Not quite certain how to get rid of that, but if you take my word for it, those boxes underneath there do not have a P for ground signs under the urban limited category. They are just blank entries. So they are therefore considered not allowed by the table. And with that, I would conclude my presentation unless you have any questions of myself at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Thank you.
I had a question, Mr. Swink. Eric, can you please show where, I thought there was somewhere in the code, can you please explain again where the requirement is? I thought there was a variant section as well.
The requirement?
The sign requirement. Is this asking for an additional sign or the sign type?
It's a sign type.
And it's not for an additional sign, and there's already one existing.
Well, they have a wall sign. They're not seeking, I don't believe they're seeking any relief from the standard were this not to have the urban limited frontage. They could have a wall sign and a freestanding sign. Their signage allocation would have to be shared amongst the two. They couldn't get any more signage that they wouldn't otherwise qualify for.
Okay.
This site did go to the board many years ago with its initial wall signage requests, if I'm not mistaken, and they did get some additional signage. I think Mr. Coleman could weigh in on the particulars of that.
I think that if there's a question about whether or not it's speaking to the board members now, question of whether or not this is a use variance, which is something that's not allowed under state law. You cannot grant a variance that would be a use variance. I don't know if a call has been made on this or not. I think Mr. Hodge referenced the zoning administrator. I think if there is a question about whether or not this is a use variance, then we need to have the zoning administrator needs to review this before you proceed. And so I think you could hear from the applicant, but if there is a question, then I think this might be a case you would want to continue into the next meeting or to a date certain to allow staff to review that.
Thank you, because I do have questions about what is allowed and what we are allowed to do. And so I'm going to need that clarified. Perhaps are there any other board questions while we've opened that door?
I think it's worth noting, since we're talking about some, pedestrian connectivity to a degree here, is there any plans that are known, as Capitol Boulevard gets improved in that area? Should we consider anything like that? I don't know of any. I haven't been presented any, but people at the city staff may know more about it.
Excuse me, who is speaking, please? Can't see everybody. Please announce who you are.
John Koontz.
Thank you.
This is Eric Hodge. There is a plan for the area of Capitol Boulevard north of downtown, all the way out to the Beltline, if I'm not mistaken. But there are plans to make that area more pedestrian friendly and more urban over time, which is reflected in the zoning on the property. That's why the property today has an urban limited frontage, which envisions a more pedestrian friendly environment. However, the current situation, that stretch of Capitol Boulevard is quite the opposite of pedestrian oriented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings into a question of timing, but it looks like there's also at one time, a ground sign there. Just worth noting, I think. I'm pretty sure there wasn't one there at one point, but
The
anyway,
previous
bringing that.
users, I think, did have a ground sign.
Yeah. So it's really, was in compliance, now it's out of compliance. But that's what we meet and discuss for, I guess.
Okay. Anyone else on the board have a question for staff for Mr. Hodge?
Yeah, this is Ms. Mile. Looking at 7.3.9, which sign are we looking at going with? Are we doing the one that's looking at the flat or the one that's erected? So it's given two different sign types.
It's the medium profile ground sign. And here's the applicant's exhibit showing what they would be looking to do. It's a roughly 6 foot tall sign.
Okay, so it'd be the ground sign.
Correct. It's considered the medium profile ground sign.
Okay.
This is John Kuntz again. So in part of their exhibit, there's that, I guess, 6x4 wooden sign they already have there. How does that get erected, and what's to keep them from keeping that there? If we were to deny this. The last page of the PowerPoint.
This one with the different images, the one I have up now, or
you scroll to the very bottom.
That one?
Yeah.
Odds are that sign is considered non-compliant, and I don't know if it would have been erected with a permit. To me, it looks like it may well be within the right of way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. It's a policing issue, really. But I was just, okay.
Other questions for Mr. Hodge? Ms. Hill, do you think you should go ahead and hear from the applicant then on this?
I think that's fine to go ahead and ask the applicant if they'd like to speak. But again, I'd reiterate, if this is a use variance, the determination needs to be made whether or not it's a use variance. And if the zoning administrator has not had a chance to look at this yet and make that question or that call, then I think that the case should be continued so that that can be done. I don't think this is the appropriate time right now to do that if it hasn't already been done. But again, I would let the applicant speak and then defer to you all as well after you.
Okay, I would note that we did administer the oath to Mr. Rometta, so I'm assuming that he is on the call. I don't know if we want to ask him to provide any comment at this time or not.
That's up to you. You could hear from the applicant first and then see if you'd like to ask Mr. Rometta a question.
Okay.
The order is up to you on that.
Thank you. Okay, let's hear from the applicant. We'd like to get Mr. Coleman's information before us as well. That might help in some way. Mr. Coleman.
Good afternoon, Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street. For the applicant, I'm here with Soretta Amos, my colleague. And I think given the questions that have been raised, I guess we think that this is, as Mr. Hodge said, I think a pretty open shut case of where a variance is appropriate. We also note that the board has granted within the last 6 months signed variance requests very similar to this, if not identical to this, on these same issues. The fact that we are now getting word that a new zoning administrator is taking a different position or could be taking a different position is frankly news to us. We are to the extent that that's, I guess, we would do the presentation at the pleasure of the board. What I would say is if the board is considered, similar to what Ms. Hoffman said, if the board is concerned at all about this question of whether this is a use-related variance or not, we don't think it is. But to the extent that the board is concerned about that, we are happy to ask for a continuance and discuss this further with Mr. Rometta, Mr. Hodge, and Ms. Hill.
Can I add one more thing too, Mr. Swink, before, if there is such a decision, I think it's a good idea to go ahead and continue, if that's going to be the call, before hearing anything further, just to make sure that we are also protecting any future hearings that come before this board as well on this matter.
Thank you. I think it's good advice for that. And Mr. Coleman, thank you for your willingness to continue the case. I think since there is a question and somewhat of a staff question that needs to be resolved, I would suggest, subject to everyone's approval, that we continue this case and let those questions get resolved so that it will be a clear and understandable discussion when we're all on the same page. So to do that.
Understood.
Okay, to do that, Ms. Hill, can we just, is that a decision I can make or do we vote on that?
Your minutes, I'm sorry, your rules say that you can defer, but I think it'd probably be best to make sure to get a vote from the members as well. And I would recommend deferring it to a date certain. I believe your next meeting would be June 8th. Is that right, Mr. Clerk, Ralph, or Eric?
Whatever the second Monday, let me see.
It would be June 8th. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I recommend making a motion to defer to that date.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rainey, for the record, you will be our alternate on this issue. So I would entertain a motion to defer this until the June 8th meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Ms. Rudisill will give you that one. Second by Mr. Rainey.
Back up, please. Who made the motion and who seconded?
Ms. Rudisill made the motion. Mr. Rainey was the second.
Please remove the presentation, please, so I can see everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor, we'll take a roll call vote.
Where is everybody? I still see just a presentation. Thank you. Mr. Rainey? I'm sorry, Ms. Rudisill.
Approved.
Thank you. Mr. Rainey?
Approved.
Thank you. Chairman Swink?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approved.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Coleman, for being with us on this one. And we will move on to our next case now. Ms. Hill.
Thank you. The next case is 4121 Commodity Parkway, PSC 3 LP as the owner. It's variance case BOA 12-2020. We have 4 individuals sign up to participate in this case: Toby Coleman, Daniel Matula, and Stephen Kittle, and Charles Yowell. Sorry, probably messed those up. But can you make sure, Beth, that Daniel is on the phone?
We did get him. I haven't sound checked him, but I see him on the list.
Okay, great. So when I call your name, please state your name and address for the record, and please also confirm for the record your consent to proceed using this remote meeting format, and then the chair will issue you the oath. I'll also say that all 4 participants for this hearing have, before the hearing, submitted to us a completed oath form as well. So Toby Coleman, I believe you've already been sworn in, but can you just acknowledge for the record that you're still here and ready to proceed?
Toby Coleman is here. I'm ready to proceed, and we do consent to proceeding with this as a remote hearing.
Great, thank you. Daniel Matula?
Yes, I am here.
Can you please state your address and confirm for the record your consent to proceed in the evidentiary hearing in a remote platform?
Yes, my address is 1867 Savoy Drive, Atlanta, Georgia, and I do consent to proceeding with this hearing.
Okay, Mr. Matula, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Stephen Kittle, am I pronouncing that probably wrong?
address is 4130 Park Lake Avenue, Suite 130.
Excuse me, please. Could you restate your name, please? I did not get it the first time.
Stephen Keidel. It's Keidel.
Is that with a V or a PH, sir?
V.
Thank you.
And I confirm and consent to this meeting.
And your address, please, again, Mr. Keidel?
4130 Park Lake Avenue, Suite 130, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27612.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Keidel, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have Charles Yowell.
Yes, I'm here. My address is 4130 Park Lake Avenue, Suite 130, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27612, and I do confirm the consent to this meeting.
Great.
Mr. Yowell, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that should be all the participants that have signed up to participate in this evidentiary hearing. So you can start with the staff presentation, and Eric Hodge is the presenter.
BOA 0012-2020, PSNC 3LP is seeking a variance for complete relief from the street protective yard requirement set forth in sections 4.4.1 and 7.2.4b of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to construct a new self-storage building as part of an existing self-storage facility on a 13.44 acre property zoned heavy industrial and also containing the Special Highway Overlay District 2. The property is located at 4121 Commodity Parkway, which is at the intersection of Commodity Parkway and South New Hope Road, just south of the 64 bypass on the east side of town. So the property is bounded on three sides by public streets. You have Commodity Parkway on the south, New Hope Road on the east, and Interstate 87 or 64 bypass on the north side of the property. They are seeking relief from the street yard screening requirements that are called for with industrial uses, as well as the specific use standard associated with the mini warehouse storage facilities. So they're looking to build a building on the western end of the property, which currently is vacant. So adding an additional facility there is what's triggering this requirement for the landscaping. Were they not to be proposing an addition, they would just be considered an existing legal nonconformity. The applicant in their application has not proposed any measures to address the street yard requirement through an alternate means for the portion of the property beyond the area under consideration for expansion. The materials submitted with the application do not provide details on the entirety of the site needed to determine whether or not full, partial, or an alternate means of compliance with this street yard landscaping are feasible. This is showing again on the western end of the site where they're looking to add an additional building. This is where all heavy industrial uses have this requirement for a type C1 or C2 protective yard that's to be established along all property lines abutting a public right-of-way. And here are the types of protective yards called for in section 7.2.4b. So they would have to do the stuff in the second column. or the third column from the left. So a 10-foot minimum width area with a 6.5-foot tall wall or fence, and then 30 shrubs scattered over the course of every 100 linear feet along those 3 streets. Or the type C2, which is a wider area. It does not have the solid wall or fence requirement, but it does have 15 shrubs for every 100 linear feet, as well as a requirement that the shrubs be at least 5 feet in height. And they also have a requirement for 4 shade trees, basically every 21 shade tree every 25 linear feet around the edge of the property along those 3 public streets. So those are the provisions they're seeking relief from. So again, I think the applicant would need to provide additional information as to why a variance would be needed with those provisions around the 3 streets adjacent to the site, even though they're only doing work in one portion of the site. Unless you have any questions of me at this time, that would conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Do you have any questions from the board? Okay, hearing none. Let's move to the applicant, Mr. Coleman.
Good afternoon. Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street, for the applicant, which is a subsidiary of Public Storage, the self-storage company. This is, as Eric outlined, it's a variance related to a proposed expansion of the Public Storage's Commodity Parkway facility. It's located in an industrial park just off South New Hope Road in East Raleigh. As you can see on that map, it's adjacent to what I still think of as 64 bypass, but I guess now on maps at least is known as I-87. And not far, it is not far from the intersection of 64 bypass and the Beltline. As noted, what Public Storage is seeking is a variance related to a street protective yard requirement. The only street protective yard requirement they're seeking is a variance from the street protective yard that they're seeking is a variance from the street protective yard requirement along Commodity Parkway. We did provide a full copy of the site plan. It's on a slide, which I'll get to in a second. It's also been provided separately as part of the packet. And it shows that they are able to provide a full street yard as required by the UDO along South New Hope Road, because the property abuts a highway to the north. It's actually subject to shod yard requirements. Those shod yard requirements have been modified slightly by an earlier variance at the time this property was developed. And so the property meets all of those requirements. The issue primarily is, as you can see in this slide, is that there's some area which is highlighted in red where there's concrete within 15 feet of what will be the new right-of-way. And so once additional right-of-way is dedicated as part of this expansion, that area will be within what is supposed to be the protective yard. And so that is the variance that we're seeking. With me today is Daniel Matula of Public Storage and Charles Yao and Stephen Keidel of Bowler Engineering. As some of the applicants have noted earlier, they're here to answer questions. I'm going to try to get, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to try to get all the evidence in for clarity rather than jumping around between witnesses. So again, just the green area on the slide is where the sixth building on this property would go. It's in addition to a storage facility that was built a little over 7 years ago, before the current UDO standards took effect. as you all probably are familiar by now, and so I may be telling you something you already know, but whenever you do an expansion, et cetera, that creates any significant increase in parking requirements or otherwise, the city requires that in order to get a site plan approval for that expansion, you have to bring the site up to the current code, and that includes things like additional right-of-way dedication, and in this case, protective yards that were not required at the time that this site was originally developed. That creates the conflict area in red, where you have an existing gated secured facility with concrete area that was permitted at the time it was installed. And the issue here is that it would have to be ripped out for the purposes of the protective yard, and the gated area, the security fencing would have to be moved or otherwise reinstalled. If you go to the next slide. The next slide is, this is a copy of the full site plan. And again, it's also, there's a PDF copy in the packet that's provided. I believe it's on board docs, a third and separate document. As you can see, the planned new building is in yellow. The area, you can see sort of the striped area where there's going to be a protective yard and tree protective area on the eastern side of the property. What you can see here is that, or you have to examine pretty closely, but what I'll tell you is that basically there's a few, in addition to, one of the things that they have to do is dedicate some additional right-of-way, I think 4 or 5 feet. So that's pushing the 15-foot line back, not just from where the existing right-of-way is, but further into the property in a way that, again, was not anticipated at the time this was originally developed. If you can go to the next slide. Again, this just sort of summarizes sort of the issues. They're only adding one building to the western edge of the lot. The variance that is being requested actually has nothing to do with that. They're satisfying, the setbacks and otherwise of that part of the property. The issue really has to do with the existing development areas. And it's the main problem here is there's a 15-foot street yard requirement along Commodity Parkway, and specifically Commodity Parkway. This was not a requirement when this property was developed 15 plus years ago. I will note that it is in an industrial park. The property across the street is also zoned industrial. So the concern about screening, and this is not a through property. This is an industrial street within a development. So there's not there's not a lot of site issues here. It's not going to be unsightly. And again, it's just allowing them to keep what is the existing conditions on the ground. If you go to the next slide. Here is, to the extent it's helpful, this is sort of as granular as we can get. I sort of clouded in red the existing paved areas that are within 15 feet of what will be the new right-of-way line after the dedication associated with the site plan is approved. As you can see, what you've got is the easternmost area is the largest area. That's the area that's really close to the secured entrance gate. I think it straddles it. And then you have a couple other areas, a driveway, which may or may not be permitted under the current code, and then another sort of sliver of concrete. Again, I mean, what this variance is seeking is not particularly broad. What they're seeking is a variance so that they don't have to rip out 7-plus-year-old concrete to address a requirement that was not in the code at the time this was developed as part of an expansion that is otherwise permissible. In regards to the standards, the hardship has been met here if without a variance, they would have to rip up pavement, the existing pavement that, by all rights is an existing condition, whether or not conforming or not. It is particular to the specific zoning and shape of the property, as well as existing development that occurred under the prior code. This is an issue that was created by the city's change and addition of requirements under the new UDO, which was put into place after this property was permitted to be developed. And it is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the code. Again, it's a very limited exception. The code allows for existing conditions to remain, and that's what we're asking for here. We are all available for questions. Happy to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Any board member questions for Mr. Coleman? I have a couple of questions, Mr. Coleman. First of all, is all of that concrete necessary? Is it other than it's there? Is it serving a necessary function right now?
It is. It's part of the drive. So the way that you get into the gated area is south of that second building from the right, and there's a gate that straddles sort of the middle of the building. That is the way that you drive into the property. So there's two separate drives. One is highlighted in red and comes off Commodity Parkway. Another comes off of the sort of office building there. And a lot of the concrete that is highlighted here is all part of drives that are associated with getting traffic, trucks and cars in and out of the gated secured area, and is really all just necessary for, cars and vehicles to turn around and or enter the property.
Okay, thank you. Any other board questions? Staff, do you have any questions for the applicant or anything you would like to comment on?
I would just like to clarify that if the board were to entertain this request, that it would be conditioned to these areas shown on this exhibit. The request, I believe, was for complete relief from the code requirements. So it was kind of an open-ended request that theoretically could be applicable to all streets. Clearly, it's not their intent to do that. But I think it would be important to condition it to these areas shown on this particular exhibit.
If I could, I would request for enforcement purposes, that's a little bit challenging. What I would suggest. I'm sorry, this is Toby Coleman.
Okay, thank you.
This is Toby Coleman. Yeah. Okay. Apologies. I'm still used to sort of operating as if we're all face to face.
We all are.
That's right. What I would suggest is for enforcement purposes, probably the easiest way to do it, rather than trying to come up with a meets and bounds that I don't currently have, is to condition it as a variance from the protected yard requirement along Commodity Parkway. And that way that creates the limit that is discussed, but doesn't, sort of create a headache for folks that are trying to figure out, okay, is this part of the variance or not?
Mr. Chair, if I may as well add to that, I think you can always impose conditions. It might be easier or cleaner to have the applicant clarify that their application is only requesting for relief as it applies to Commodity Parkway. I think that they've already stated that, but I think, when you make your motion, whatever way you would vote, I would make sure you specify that it's your decision is only related to Commodity Parkway, and have the applicant confirm again for the record that that's all they're requesting right now.
Okay.
And maybe add that it's
choice to proceed that way.
And maybe add that it's for portions of Commodity Parkway that already have pavement within 15 feet of the proposed right-of-way. Because that's essentially what these areas are, correct, Mr. Coleman?
You are correct, Mr. Hodge. Again, what I would say is just, again, in connection with this development, we had to take a look at a variance from the shod yard requirements that was granted for the north side of this property back in, I want to say 2009, 2010 range. And again, just based on my experience in trying to track those down and get the specifics, what we would propose and what we were, just for ease of purpose of, everybody trying to enforce, what I would say is that we're asking for a zoning variance related to the protective yards along Commodity Parkway. Happy to discuss that, but I would suggest that that's probably the most feasible way to do it for all sides.
So to be clear, you're asking for complete relief along Commodity Parkway of the.
Yes. Now, I mean, there are requirements for things like street trees and things like that. The complication here being that, is that it's a secured area and all that other stuff. So there is existing landscaping, and there will be landscaping there. So we think that addresses the intent of the policy.
So there will be some landscaping. You are going to meet other standards. You're just talking about the street protective yard specifically.
Correct. Which is an area on the property. So, there are areas within the right of way for, where there's going to be street trees and other things. The existing property, I believe, has some limited landscaping in front of the fencing. But I think what we're seeking is a variance for the full frontage along Commodity Parkway. Again, just in large part because it starts to get very complicated to figure out, if you're looking 10, 15 years down the road, what's existing, what's not, that sort of thing.
Any other board questions? Any other comments or questions from staff?
Again, staff has some concerns about full relief along the street only because these three sections are compromised. The full eastern and western end of the site is not showing any compromise with compliance with the standard. And this is a very, substantial frontage of property, and to let, 2/3 of it off the hook because 1/3 is compromised seems to be a bit extreme from staff's viewpoint.
Well, I just want to point out that
make sure you're stating your name. Sorry,
I'm sorry. This is Toby Coleman. I apologize.
You're stating your name before you speak, just so we're clear who's saying what.
Sure. Mr. Chair, this is Toby Coleman, if I could speak.
Yes.
Two things. Number one, the area west of the office building, which starts in or around the striped sort of tree protective area that touches the Commodity Parkway frontage, it is all sort of natural area. So that area is going to be protective yard, and we're happy to, however you want to try to craft a condition. Again, my concern is mainly crafting. That's an area that's south of, I believe, the stormwater pond, and is in an area that is not going to be developed. Again, my concern mainly is that for sort of the western half of the property, trying to define specifically where concrete exists and where it didn't, and that sort of thing, gets a little challenging. But again, I mean, we're happy to work with you if it's the board's desire to further limit it as staff suggests. We will certainly work within that. But again, I'm mainly saying this just as somebody who is oftentimes asked to look at these things after the fact, and getting into this level of detail can get a little bit challenging to try to track down, okay, what exactly was the map that the Board of Adjustment was looking at the time that this was happening, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in support of this request? Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Staff, board, anything further? We'll close the evidentiary hearing. I will just lead by saying I share Mr. Hodges' concern that there seems like there's opportunity throughout this property for street yard protection of some kind. I don't have a suggestion. I appreciate Mr. Coleman's point that it has to be very precisely defined so that it can be measured and monitored. I don't have a suggestion for how to do that. So I'm somewhat of at a loss to suggest a condition, but I would welcome anyone else who might offer one if anyone cares to.
And Mr. Swink, I would also say that if the applicant had a condition that they would want to offer, it would be, if we had it already written down, it'd be easier. I agree, it's difficult, and you have to think about enforcement in terms of staff applying it too. So just whatever you guys can come up with, if you want to condition it, if you think that it's something that you're able to do in this format, or if you need to have more time to think about it, that's an option as well. So,
I mean, typically these things are shown by exhibits. This is the exhibit that shows the areas that are compromised based on an existing conditions situation, which should be on the plan sheets associated with this project.
We need to make sure the evidentiary hearing is closed, so I think that we need to be careful that make sure that Mr. Swink is acknowledging everybody to speak as well, so that we're clear for the record, since we're in this new platform.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, it may be that no one else on the board has any concern. It may be that I'm the only one, and in which case I will certainly entertain a motion.
This is Michael Rainey. I don't even know if I'm voting on this one, but just for purposes of the discussion, Mr. Swink, I share your concern and think that the city staff's concern about it is well founded. I think in a perfect world, we would be able to get a little bit more granular detail to stake out what any condition would be should the board ultimately elect to grant this.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Swink, you could refer to the exhibit. It's just, it would be, I think, if Eric and staff thinks that that's something that they can apply, I don't know if there's another exhibit that shows it more clearly or not.
Then I will ask Mr. Hodge, as staff member on this, do you believe this exhibit is sufficient? If we offered this as the condition, would this be sufficient from a staff perspective?
I believe staff would be able to utilize this exhibit in concert with the full plan set, which is to scale, and to try to figure out what linear sections of street yard would be given relief that correspond with these areas compromised by existing pavement. And so they would reduce the linear footage of the street yard down by the linear footage of the compromised areas, and apply the remaining sections with full compliance obligations. So they would take out those 3 areas of varying lengths from the equation that they use to determine the requisite plantings. I'm assuming they're going the route of the planting versus the solid fencing or wall required by C1, because again, they're referring to a 15-foot area, whereas the code would allow for a C1 area to be as narrow as 10 feet with a solid fence or wall. And I understand why they don't want to have something that's spits and spurts along the road that, you know, for a while you got landscaping and then for a while you got fencing, et cetera, et cetera. I think staff could support just the full complement of the landscaping for those areas that are not compromised.
Mr. Spink, I'm sorry.
Yep,
I would also, just because of this platform, and since the staff's had the opportunity to speak, I would make sure to give the applicant the opportunity to just speak one more time as well, just to make sure that we're not leaving out anybody's right to say anything if they'd like to. And you might want to ask the applicant if this accurately reflects where they are asking for relief.
It's an excellent point. Thank you. Mr. Coleman, if this exhibit were utilized, does this accurately reflect where you're seeking relief? I understand you were seeking total relief, but if this were conditioned, does this, with what Mr. Hodge just said, do you have a comment or response to that?
I think it does. I would ask, I've got Charlie Yao from Bowler Engineering on, and if he could jump in and speak on that, or Stephen Cadell.
And Mr. Swing, it sounds like you're going to have to open up the evidentiary hearing. I don't think you need to vote to do that. I think it's something that until you guys get ready to, you would, okay. Our assistant city clerk would like you to vote to do that, I think. No, okay. Even not like you to vote. I'm sorry, misinterpreted. Ralph, are you good? If we,
it is okay for the chairman to just simply reopen the hearing. That's fine.
Okay, that's what I was thinking too. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Spink, I think you could reopen the hearing to take some more testimony from the participants.
Thank you. Since we've raised the questions and had staff comment, I would like to reopen the evidentiary hearing and get additional information from some of the other witnesses. Please introduce yourself before you speak or when you speak, so we'll know who's talking.
Hi.
I'll start by acknowledging Toby Coleman and asking him who he would like to have as a witness to answer the question.
Mr. Coleman, do you want to call the witness?
Sure. I'll call Charlie Yao.
Mr. Yao?
Yes. My name is Charlie Yao, 4130 Park Lake Avenue in Raleigh. Yes, the three areas that Mr. Coleman has identified on the exhibit are the three areas that we're requesting relief from the C2 buffer requirements, or the C1/C2 buffer requirements. And I believe, yeah, basically all three of those areas are needed for the operations of the facility. The area to the east is needed for the main entryway into the site, as well as parking along the building. The area in the middle is required for the main entryway, and then the area to the west is required just for travelway requirements, just so vehicles can actually make that turn around the building. So that's what we're requesting relief from.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman, anything else?
That is it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodge, any response?
I don't have anything else.
Thank you. I'd like to close the evidentiary hearing and bring it back to the board. We have, I think, a little more clarity on this situation. Mr. Kinney, for this discussion, you'll be our voter, but we'll take a motion, and there's at least a willingness for a condition if anyone wishes to offer one. Hearing none, to move things along, I would move that we grant this variance with a condition that the street protected yard requirements still be applied in those areas outside of the red highlighted areas as shown on this exhibit, which is part of the PowerPoint presentation. I cannot be any more precise than that, but basically allowing there not to have to do street yard in these three areas, but to meet the street yard requirements in the rest of the Commodity Parkway area where they're abutting. Ms. Hill, that's pretty flaky language, but is that sufficient for us as a motion?
I can't hear her, actually.
I'm sorry. I think that is sufficient for to condition the approval as shown on the exhibit on the screen now, to require compliance in the areas outside of the red drawing. So, and staff has said that that's sufficient for them from the perspective.
Thank you. Okay, then we now have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Who is the second?
Ms. Mile.
Mr. Mile, thank you. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coates.
Approved.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisil.
Approve.
Thank you, and Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. May we take a short recess, maybe 5 minutes?
Yep.
That sounds good. I would just state you'd come back, what time you'd come back, so we can make sure for those watching.
Okay, it's 3:40 by my clock. If we could be back by 3:45.
All right.
Okay.
I'd ask the moderator to mute everybody if she could until then.
Sure.
Thank you. for the next hearing, and then allow Mr. Oh, here we go. Like he's coming in.
Okay. My sincere apologies. Heads up, my battery was dying and then it was just dead and I could not get rebooted. I apologize. But here we are. Is everyone else back on the call?
We have everybody.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for the break. That was necessary. Who knew I was going to have to redo the computer, though? Let's move on to our next case, which is Ms. Hill.
Okay, this is our sixth evidentiary hearing, case 609 Brook Drive. Matthew and Molly Lee are the property owner applicant. It's BOA case 10-2020. We have 3 participants signed up for this case: Isabel Maddox, Matthew Lee, and Molly Lee. When I call your name, please state your name and address and confirm for the record your consent to proceed in the remote meeting. And again, I have signed oath forms from all 3 of these participants submitted prior to this meeting. So we'll start with Isabel Maddox.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Isabel Maddox, PO Box 946, Raleigh 27602, and I consent to the remote meeting.
Ms. Maddox, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Matthew Lee.
Hey, this is Matt Lee, address 3609 Brook Drive. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to proceed remotely and glad to confirm our consent to proceed this way.
Mr. Lee, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and Molly Lee.
Yes, this is Molly Lee of 3609 Brook Drive.
And can you please confirm for the record your consent to proceed in this remote platform?
Yes, I give consent.
Great.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, that's all I have signed up to participate. I think you can start with the staff presentation with Eric Hodge when you're ready.
Mr. Hodge.
Thank you. So Matthew and Molly Lee, the property owners, are requesting an 8.6, 8.5 foot variance from the side lot line setback requirements there on the northern side of the property that are set forth in section 2.2.1.b.3 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to construct an attached garage on the north side of the existing house, which would result in a 1.5 foot side yard setback for the detached house on a 0.34 acre property that is zoned residential 4 and again located at 3609 Brook Drive. Here's an aerial showing where the house is. So they're looking basically to construct a garage where the existing parking area is on the north side of the house. The ordinance allows for any part of the principal structure requires a 10-foot side yard setback when the property is zoned R4. The code does allow for driveways in these infill type settings to be as close as, I believe, 2.5 feet from a property line. So driveways can go closer to property lines than principal structure can.
I would note that this house was built in the late 1950s and has been there for all those years since without an attached garage. Garages, while common to residential structures, are not a requisite element. A detached garage would be subject to different standards. Detached structures can violate setbacks for the principal structure. However, they have their own different set of rules that they follow. So there are limitations on the size of detached accessory structures and how close they can go to property lines. However, in no instance could a detached garage go closer than 5 feet to a side property line. The applicant has not provided detailed information with their application as to why a detached garage would not be possible. So I would be looking for the applicant to provide more detail with their presentation as to why a detached garage is not an option if you are to consider the request. And lastly, all structures in the residential zoning districts have certain allowances for encroachments by right into setbacks. Things like porches and decks and patios, chimneys, that sort of thing. But in no instance, just as a comparison, in no instance does the code allow for those things to encroach any closer than 3 feet to an adjacent property line. And so they're looking to have the principal structure of the house be as close as 1.5 feet. So that's twice as close as any open structure would be allowed to encroach if part of the principal structure. Here is the plan showing the proposed garage there on that north side of the house. And this drawing, north is actually to the right. So they're proposing a fairly substantial garage on the right side of the house when viewed from the street. And again, the code would be requiring that be 10 feet from the property line, and they're wanting to go, this drawing shows 1.8 feet. But I think the request was written a little more generously to allow for wiggle room in the event that something in the field was off. So the request is for a full 8.5 foot variance, which would result in a 1.5 foot setback if approved. That concludes my presentation, unless you have any questions for staff at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Any board questions for Mr. Hodge?
Yeah, I have a question. Is this currently being operated as a residence and it's going to become a daycare, or?
I believe this is residential. The next case, the last case on today's agenda, is about a daycare. So this is just about a variance for a garage addition.
Okay, I'm sorry, skipping ahead.
No worries.
That's okay.
Out of curiosity,
You've done your reading.
out of curiosity, Mr. Hodge, is there room? There's room for them to go back. Is that right? In terms of, I'm looking at the drawing now, and what I'm trying to figure out is if the goal is to get 2 vehicles in, could we go with a more narrow width but go farther back so you have still a 2-car garage, but it's stacked entry basically?
I would believe so. You would need to direct that question to the applicant as to why going further back may or may not be problematic.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Hodge? Okay, let us hear from the applicant, Ms. Maddox.
Good afternoon. This is Isabel Maddox, PO Box 946, Raleigh. Is someone else speaking? I'm sorry, I got a little tone. Isabel Maddox, PO Box 946, Raleigh 27602. I'm here today on behalf of Matthew and Molly Lee. They're seeking a variance for their residence at 3609 Brook Drive. And Mr. and Mrs. Lee are here and available for questions at the end of my presentation and to confirm various matters. We would like to request that the board accept the application materials as part of the record. And as we can proceed with my slides to the first slide, you can see the property in red is the subject property, and it backs up to a townhouse development. And I'll go into detail as I go through this, but you can see the space that exists between the northern edge of their property and the closest other developed parcel. They are seeking 8.5-foot variance to the side lot line to permit the requirement for an attached garage, the setback requirement. There's currently a carport in that location. And proceed to Exhibit 3. Next exhibit. There is a carport in that area right now. So this garage would basically be removing a carport, which is dated. The house was, as Mr. Hodge mentioned, constructed in the 50s, and they have done significant renovations to the house, but would like to transform that carport into a garage that's more consistent with the overall quality of their house. There are a number of hardships here which make development of a garage on another side of the property difficult. First of all, as you stand in Brook Drive and face the house, on the left, you only have 20 feet between that side of the house and the property line. So you really need a garage to be a little over 20 feet wide to function well as a side-by-side garage. Also, there's a drainage flume, concrete flume that runs on the back of the property and along that side lot line that would have to be removed if they were to try to put anything there. So I don't think that side is really an option. The rear, now you might say, why can't they put this in the rear? Well, they have significant topo, and if you look on Exhibit 5, you'll see there's 10 feet of fall between the rear line and the house. It would require a significant retaining wall, significant grading and removal of dirt, and more impervious surfaces, because you'd have to pave more driveway to get back to a garage in the back. Also, their neighbor, as you can see, the neighbor to the west has a pool right there, and they'd rather not disturb that neighbor by the construction process and by having a garage in that location. They think the garage is well suited for the same location as the carport. And now jump back to slide, I think it's 2, which is the aerial photo. And you can see just to the north of this property, heavily wooded areas. And that's what exists there between this property and the townhouses to the north. There are, as we said, serious mitigating factors for locating the garage in the requested location. The property to the north is a townhouse development, construction approximately 2014, and there's recorded tree conservation area for 80 feet along that line. And if you'll move to Exhibit 7, sorry to jump around so much, but Exhibit 7 will show you that there's a recorded tree conservation map. You can see it in Exhibit 6, actually, there's a recorded map in Exhibit 7, 80 feet wide, but then there's another 20 feet approximately that takes you to the actual buildings. So you've got almost 100 feet building to building. There's also that area, and I think it's approximately 80 feet, is zone conservation management. So it's not just a development pattern, it's also zoning in that area that I think it's very unlikely to be changed because, as I said, there's a zoning designation of conservation management on that first, I think, 80 feet adjacent to this north line. Also, these townhomes were built, 5 or 6 years ago. They're relatively new construction. unlikely that it will be redeveloped at any point soon. So I think there are multiple hardships on the property. There's the built location of the home. There's the concrete drainage flume. There's significant topo in the rear. The need for significant grading, including a retaining wall in the back, if you were to put it back there. The requirement for more grading and more paving. And the garage will really essentially be located where the carport is. We think it'll be more aesthetically appealing for the neighborhood. It'll also allow certain uses of the property, certain things like garbage cans, lawnmowers, gardening tools, kids' bikes to be put inside as opposed to being visible to the neighbors. And in conclusion, we believe that we have provided evidence of hardships that were not created by the applicant that are specific to this property. And we feel like we've shown that there are mitigating factors that show that this variance request is in the public interest and is consistent with the intent and purpose of the setback ordinance. It will still remain very adequate spacing between this property and the adjacent property. And we think it's more protective of the neighbors to the immediate west. And therefore, we would request your approval. Mr. Hodge made a couple of comments about nothing's allowed to be less than 3 feet away. Well, those are sanctioned encroachments under the code. In this case, we're asking for a variance of the code, and we think we've presented a good case that variance is warranted here.
Is that it, Ms. Maddox?
Yes, that's
Okay,
been my presentation. I'm certainly available for questions, as are Mr. and Ms. Lee.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Any board members, any questions for Ms. Maddox or for the Lees?
Is there this is John Coons. Is there a picture of the carport? I'm not finding any kind of visual online from Google.
You know, I think there is I think there's probably one on iMaps, and I apologize for not including that in the package.
Sorry, can I intervene real quickly and advise the board not to look up anything that's not being presented to you on your own?
Right.
Make sure that all evidence is what you're looking at is in the record and on board docs as well. Just to make sure that we're all electronic format.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Other board questions?
I have a question. Is some of that area floodplain behind the lot or between Penley Circle and the parcel in question?
I don't believe so.
Okay, I was just curious.
I'm sorry, who asked that question?
I was just curious because it might not be developable behind that parcel in the first place if that's floodplain.
Mr. Kinney asked the question.
Oh, Mr.
Thank
Steve.
you. I don't know who it was.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I have a response to that question. I'm checking on GIS, and no, it is not floodplain.
Oh, okay, thanks.
But it is a recorded tree conservation area and a conservation management zoning district in that area, both of which are very restrictive as far as any clearing of trees.
Okay, I'd like to make an observation in looking at the topo map. And again, topo maps are generalized. They tend to be fairly accurate, but not as accurate as a surveyor. But the 10-foot differential actually is at the property line to the house, where you could build a garage is more on the order of a 4-foot differential. So the nature of needing a retaining wall is less than suggested. Not to say there might not still need to be some land movement or some treatment, but just as an observation, I think that it's not as onerous an idea of putting the garage in a different location than was suggested.
Well, if I could respond to that point, and Mr. Lee is on, and I'd like him to possibly comment. He has talked with a contractor, and I think he has been told that he would need to install a retaining wall there, and that would require more impervious And so we feel like it's probably not the best solution for the neighborhood. Mr. Lee, do you have a comment on that?
I agree that there's a retaining wall would be required. It's not a 10-foot wall is all I'm observing.
No, and I wasn't saying that. I said there was 10 foot of fall.
Yeah, this is Matt Lee. I can speak to some of that just from observation. There's a small retaining wall there right now at the back of the driveway, maybe a few blocks high. And it continues to rise from the point of the driveway's end to the back. And we're hoping to just build basically right up to that existing wall. I don't know if we kept going back how high the retaining wall would have to be, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't something close to head high to get back far enough away from the house. And then we're in the backyard where the kids play and my wife gardens and things like that. So it's kind of a combination of the impact there.
And keep in mind that to do a detached garage, you would have to be, I think, 10 feet off the principal structure. I guess if you did an attached garage, but it's hard. You have to make a garage. If you have an attached garage, it's got to work with the house, and so that the side of your house is accessible. And I think it's much more accessible from their north side.
Have any more questions from the board? Mr. Hodge, any response?
No additional comments from staff.
Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of this request? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Applicant, do you have anything, Ms. Maddox, anything further you wish to add?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Hodge, anything further?
No, sir.
Okay, any further board questions? And then we'll close the evidentiary hearing and we'll move to board deliberations. Mr. Rainey, you will be our voter in this case, please. Okay. So I'll take comment, observation, question, or even a motion. I shouldn't have given you a break. Are there reservations? People are on. Is there a reason we're not getting a motion?
This is Mr. Mall. I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second? I'm not hearing a second.
I'll second the motion.
Who was that, please?
That was Mr. Rainey.
Mr. Rainey, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Okay, we will take our roll call vote.
Thank you. Mr. Mile?
Yes.
Mr. Rainey?
Approve.
Mr. Swink?
Approve.
Let's see, Mr. Coates?
Deny.
Ms. Rudisill?
I'll approve.
The vote is 4-1 to approve.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let's move along now to our next case, please.
Great. This is your 7th and last evidentiary hearing. Address is 1516 Bethel Road. This is Praise Worship Tabernacle is the owner and Happy Times Daycare is the leasee. This is special use permit case BOA 14-2020. We have 3 individuals signed to participate in this case: Jennifer Feinstein, Arturo Marshall, and Ilya Alexif. Again, when I call your name, please state your name and your address, and also please confirm for the record that you consent to the remote meeting platform. We'll start with Jennifer Feinstein. And it looks like Jennifer's on mute still. Beth, can you unmute Jennifer? There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me? This is Jennifer.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is Jennifer Feinstein. I'm with Feinstein Law Firm. I'm at 8360 Six Forks Road, Suite 104, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27615. And I confirm to a remote meeting.
Okay, Ms. Feinstein, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Arturo Marshall. It looks like Arturo, there you go.
Arturo Marshall, 301 North King Charles Road, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27610. I consent to remote platform.
Mr. Marshall, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and I should also note that all three participants in this case also provided an oath form to us prior to the meeting as well. And our last participant is Ilya Alexeyev.
Good afternoon. This is Ilya Alexeyev, 1005 Northcliffe Drive in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I consent to the remote platform.
Mr. Alexeyev, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Chair, that's all the participants we have signed up. So you're ready to begin with Mr. Hodges' presentation whenever you're ready.
Mr. Hodge.
BOA 0014-2020, Praise Worship Tabernacle, the property owner, and Happy Times Daycare, the leasee, are requesting a special use permit pursuant to section 6.4.1.c and 10.2.9 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to operate a daycare center on this site with a maximum number of enrollment of 50 children and 8 staff persons. The property is 2.79 acres and is zoned residential 6 and located at 1516 Bethel Road. This property did receive a special use permit many years ago. However, either the use never moved forward or there was a lapse in operation or a change in operator. In the past, the board used to grant special use permits specifically to the applicant as a condition. However, I would note that under state law, special use permits are allowed to run with the land. So if the board were to approve this request, there is no legal requirement to condition the approval to Happy Times Daycare. Anybody else could theoretically assume ownership or operation of the facility in the future, so long as they abide by whatever conditions are imposed if you were to approve this case today. The standards associated with a special use permit, there are 8 general standards applicable to all special use permits, and then there are a list of specific use standard requirements associated with the daycare operations itself on a residentially zoned piece of property. The applicant's going to need to demonstrate compliance with those 8 generic standards associated with special use permits, as well as the specific use standards listed in Chapter 6, the regulations for daycare centers in residential zoning districts. And staff really has no additional comment on those. The applicant has an extensive presentation to go over their responses and considerations associated with those findings. This site, as the name of the property owner might indicate, is a religious facility, a church on the property. And so this would be a use, as I understand it, that would be operating during the week when church services are not occurring, rather than the building sit empty, that the Sunday school classrooms and whatnot could be used for a daycare, or the daycare facilities within the church itself that are used during religious services could double down and be used by a leasee during those times when they're not in use by the church. So unless you have any questions of me at this time, I would turn it over to the applicant to go into the specifics of their special use permit. Oh, one last thing. This is the site plan showing the proposed transitional protective yard installations, which they can speak to as far as their Chapter 6 use standard requirements. I believe this is, again, we're not certain if these things were proposed and never installed with the previous special use permit granted on this site, or if they never got installed, and that's what they're seeking to do now since the other special use permit did expire.
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you. I thought you could read my lips. Any board member questions for Mr. Hodge? Hearing none, thank you. Ms. Feinstein, welcome.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So just to reiterate quickly some of what Mr. Hodges mentioned, to go through Article 6.4.1.c, the daycare is for more than 8 persons where staffing complies with state and local regulations. This would include a nursery school and a preschool. Next slide. In a residential district, the following minimum lot areas per enrollee apply. Now, this particular lot is an R6, so that would be 640 square feet. And it would also require that there is 1 unlit announcement sign allowed not to exceed 2 square feet in an area and 3.5 feet in height. Next slide. In a residential district, a type A1 or A2 transitional protective yard must be established along any side of the property abutting a residential use. Likewise, in a residential district, a type C2 street protective yard must be established along all property lines abutting a public right-of-way, and the daycare must comply with all state and local standards. Next slide, please. As mentioned, this daycare center, well, it would be for children, Mr. Hodges mentioned, between the ages of 12, and it's allowed in this special use in an R6 zoning district. Next slide. The Praise Worship Happy Times Daycare requests a special use permit to operate a daycare center with 50 enrollees and 8 staff persons. And as mentioned, the 1516 Bethel Road property is zoned R6, and the requirement is 640 square feet per 1 enrollee. This property, as Mr. Hodges mentioned, is 2.79 acres, which equates to 121,532 square feet. Next slide, please. And that would accommodate 190 enrollees. So as we mentioned, this particular daycare would have 50 enrollees. Next slide. The daycare center would comply with the UDO by installing 1 suitable and appropriate unlit announcement sign not to exceed 2 square feet in an area and 3.5 feet in height. Next slide, please. The transitional protective yard is not applicable to the daycare center because, as mentioned, it has this particular property is abutting a vacant property and not residential. However, because the property is a church, it already has more restrictive transitional protective yard that consists of mature shrubs and a wooden fence, which I have photos of that I'll show you in the next couple slides. The plot plan shows a 25-foot C transitional protective yard along the property line on the backside of the property, as well as along the property line on the side of the property abutting the vacant lot. And the plot plan shows a type A1 transitional property yard along the property line on the side abutting the Truth in Jesus Christ Holiness Church, which you'll see. Next slide, please. So this is the plot plan, and we'll go to the next slide. So this is the front of the church, praise worship as it exists right now. Next slide, please. This is the property line that abuts the vacant lot, and this is all mature shrubs and trees. Next slide, please. And this is the front of the property. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, back side of the property. I'm sorry, go back to that for a second. Thank you. Back one. Yeah, this is all along the back side of the property, again with shrubs and trees. Next slide. And then this is the property line that abuts the Truth in Christ Holiness Church. Next slide. Okay, so as mentioned too, the property needs to have a type C street protective yard, and that is already established. Next slide. And this is the front of the property. So if you were in front of the church looking out towards the street, this is what you would see. Next slide, please. So Praise Worship Tabernacle Church, which would be then hosting or holding Happy Times Daycare, would comply with all state and local standards as a daycare. Next slide, please. The proposed use is compatible with adjacent uses in terms of location, scale, site, design, hours of operation, operating characteristics. So the daycare provides the residents a place to take their children while they're at work. It's conveniently located close to all area residents. The existing building is already compatible with an area location, and the hours of operation would be convenient as well, as they'd be 6 a.m. until 6 p.m., which would align with the residents' working schedules. Next slide, please. Adverse impacts from the proposed use will be effectively mitigated, and the only one we really can think of is there's no foreseeable adverse impacts other than possible levels of noise, which would be minimal from the children. And if there was anything, any issues with that, then it would be discussed and policies would be put in place. Next slide, please. In regard to dedications of streets and utilities, all appropriate dedications of streets and utilities to the public have already been made with the existing building. This is also too the first step for the daycare center in seeking all application permits and applicable permits. Next slide, please. Access with respect to pedestrian, bicycle, and automotive safety, traffic flow, and emergency services adequate. There's a wide entrance and exit leading to a large parking lot on the side and back of the building. The parking lot is handicapped accessible. There is a sidewalk down the side of the parking lot entrance and exit, and the parking lot is near a bus stop. Next slide, please. And there is a view from the street looking towards the church, which would be the daycare from the road. Next slide, please. Proposed use meets standards of ordinance. So a daycare center at 1516 Bethel Road meets all standards as set forth by the UDO, Article 6.4.1.c, without the granting of any variance to the specific use standards. And that is it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Feinstein.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, this is Ms. Mall. I had one question. She indicated from 6 to 6. Is that Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday? I mean, what are the days?
I would defer to Mr. Marshall, the leasing, to answer that.
Monday through Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Hodge, any additional comments?
No, sir. Staff has nothing else.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in support of this request? Anyone here wishing to speak in opposition to this request? Hearing none, is there any additional information from the applicant? Ms. Feinstein, anything else you wish to offer?
There is none. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hodge?
No, nothing else.
Okay. I'll close the evidentiary hearing and we'll move it to the board for deliberation. Mr. Kenny, you will be our voter in this one. Special use permit request. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve, John Coons.
We have a motion to approve for Mr. Koontz. Is there a second?
Second, Ms. Mile.
Mr. Mile with a second. Any further discussion? We'll have a roll call vote.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Riddisell.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Feinstein, and we appreciate the cases we've heard today. I think that's the last one on our docket. We have some additional business to attend to. So we'll move along to the approval of the minutes of our March 9th, 2020 meeting, which seems like it took place about 3 years ago.
It did, actually.
But we do have the minutes were provided. So any additions or corrections to the minutes? Have a motion to approve. I move approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Miles, a second. Do you need a roll call vote for this as well?
No.
We do, under this new bill, it would be best if we do a roll call vote for anything the board votes on. So if you don't mind, one more time, Mr.
Okay. Should I call for all six or just the five?
Just the five. Well, who do you want to vote on the minutes?
Mr. Rainey.
Okay. All right then.
I think that's your turn.
Okay. Then. Okay, Chairman Riddisell. I mean, Chairman Swink. I'm speaking of prophecy. Sorry.
I had a great relief for a moment.
Chairman Swink. Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisil. Future Chairman.
I wasn't at that meeting, but I guess I can approve, right? Approve.
You're allowed to vote on the minutes as long as you've reviewed them. You don't have to be at the meeting when they were.
Okay, approve.
Thank you. And Mr. Ernie?
Approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to our board attorney for any reports. Ms. Hill?
No report for me.
Okay. Well, before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you all for stepping up today. This is new for all of us. This is sort of like my first class teaching a few weeks ago. I stumbled and bumbled, but we got through to it. So thank you all for helping us get there. And thank you, Ms. Stagner, for being our tech person. Certainly appreciate that if you're still with us. And if anyone has any more business, if not, we stand adjourned and hopefully we'll figure out where we'll be the next time. Could be here again.
Could be.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, appreciate you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.